4 people were gunned down in an apartment complex after a young man with a promising future throws it all away. Then, a father is gunned down in front of his family when they dropped on a family. For homicide detectives, their chance of solving a murder is cut in half if they do not get a lead within the first 48 hours. Some of the participants in this documentary are actors, and some scenes have been altered for dramatic effect. A caller called 911 around 1:20 p.m. in the city of Tulsa. 911 operator asks if she needs police, fire, or medical. The caller says she needs medical. 911 operator asks her what's going on. The caller said she doesn't know. She said she just woke up and she started hearing some noises. Then she went over to her balcony and she saw that 2 people that have been shot. 911 operator told her officers are on their way. When the first respondents arrived, they found 4 people that have been shot. 2 men and a woman were rushed to the hospital. The remaining person was already dead before officers arrived at the scene of the incident. 23-year-old veteran detective Reggie Warren would lead the case. "What's going on?" an officer asked. Sergeant Brandon Watkins told him they have 1 person that is deceased on the side of the walk-in between the apartments. His name is Joshua Smith. 26-year-old Joshua Smith was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and moved to Tulsa in 2013. After graduating from Atlanta High, he enrolled in culinary school and planned to open a restaurant. Joshua was survived by his mother, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and a 1-year-old daughter. Joshua was shot 8 times. Sergeant Brandon Williams said they have 3 people that have been transported to the hospital for gunshot wounds. The man that was shot in the head is 23-year-old Marco Celestine Jr. Marco and his girlfriend Raven had a child and another baby on the way. The detectives discovered several casings in the parking lot and on the sidewalks. The team also recovers 11 .40 caliber shell casings. A detective said it seems the shooting started initially in the parking lot and shot were fired and continued down to the east. While detectives Ronnie Leatherman and John Brown went out to talk to people downtown, the team canvassed the apartment complex. They got a witness to speak with them. She narrated what she knew. Detective Reggie and other detectives were not too satisfied with what they heard from her. They wanted to hear more from her, so they told her she will be more appreciated if she could come to homicide. She obliged and followed the detectives. As soon as they got to homicide, she was taken into an investigation room. Detective Ronnie was the detective that entered the interrogation room where she was being held to ask her some questions. Detective Ronnie told her to tell him everything she knows. She said she was sitting in her car watching TV, and then she heard gunshots out of nowhere. She said the gunshots were consecutive and just kept going off. She said she hit the ground. She said when the gunshot stopped, she kept on hearing the voice of a woman yelling for help. In Mobile, Alabama, a call came through to 911. 911 operators picked the call and asked the caller what her emergency was. The caller told them someone has just been shot. 911 operators asked her the location of the shooting. She kept on saying, "Stephen, baby, stay with me." The caller finally gave 911 operators her location. She said she was at Azalea and Seabreeze. 911 operators immediately transferred her over to medical. She kept saying, "I love you, Stephen, baby," while her call was transferred to the medical. A few minutes later, police and DMs responded and found a man lying on the street dead. Detective Glenn Barton asked officers if they already have the name of the victim. An officer told him that they have the victim's name and he is Stephen Fields, Jr. 39-year-old Stephen Fields, Jr. worked in a construction company to support his 5 children. Stephen was recently engaged and moved in with his fiancée. Stephen was shot once in the head. A single shell casing of a 9mm Luger was found next to Stephen's foot. A witness came forward to speak with detectives. The witness said showed them Stephen's fiancée. He assured detectives that the female holding a baby over there is Stephen's fiancée. The detectives approached her and she agreed to talk when she gets to homicide. Immediately they arrived at homicide. She was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. Detective Ronnie and another detective entered the interrogation room where she was being held to ask her some questions. Detective Ronnie told her he wants to know what happened. He urged her to tell him everything she knew. She said Donna called her in the morning because Donna wanted her to come to her house. She waited on Stephen to get off work because the next day was his birthday. She said she took Stephen out for dinner to celebrate his birthday. Detective Ronnie asked her if Stephen knew Donna. She said Stephen and Donna were neighbors. She said Donna moved into the house where Stephen was living with her son and his girlfriend about a month ago. She said Donna told her she just needed to talk to her for a second. She said Stephen and his son waited in the car while she went inside. When she entered, Donna told her to sit and talk to her for a second. The next thing she saw was a black guy running in the door. The black guy went to the safe that was in Donna's room. She said he told Donna he needed his gun. He said he needed to go outside. She said the black man grabbed a gun and ran out of the room. She said as he was going down the steps, she was trying to figure out what was going on. Donna ran out behind him. Detective Ronnie asked if he saw the victim get shot. She said the black guy just shot the victim in the head and the victim fell. He asked her again if she remembers what he was wearing. She said she can't tell him even one thing about him. She said she doesn't know who he was, but it sounded like he was called Smoke. Detective Ronnie asked her if she knew who called him Smoke. She said it was Donna that called him Smoke and she drove away with her son. Detective Ronnie asked her if she has any idea why anybody would shoot Stephen. She said she thinks everything that happened was a setup. She said Donna told her son in the past that Stephen owed her money. She said she was outside when she got outside. She said after she followed the gunman out of the house, she saw Donna's son lying on the street. She thinks her son and Stephen might have gotten into it and the guy got a gun and shot Stephen. At this point, Donna threatened to kill Stephen, Detective Ronnie asked. She said Donna usually threatens to kill people all the time. Just hold tight. I will be right back, Detective Ronnie said while he left the interrogation room. The detective turned to the woman who rents the apartment and who was dating Donna's son. So who stays in that apartment with you? The detective asked. She said she and her kids. Who else stays at the house? The detective asked again. Mama, she replied. What exactly do you remember about when everything went down? The detective continued with his investigation. She said when the girl knocked at the door, she asked her what she wanted. She said she opened the door. She said her old man and little skinny dude were getting into it. She said while she was at the door, she saw Stephen and a black male fighting in the street. She said Mama ran out of the house. She ran past her. She saw Stephen and the skinny dude tussling. After that, she heard a firecracker. She said the skinny black dude ran behind the back of her apartment. Back to the other murder case, detectives just learned that a witness responded to the female victim. The witness was brought to homicide for questioning. As soon as she arrived at homicide, she was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. After a series of questions and answers with Detective Ronnie, the witness was given a card that had Detective Ronnie's name and phone number on it. He told her to call him as soon as he has any information concerning the murder. Detective Leatherman visited the hospital where the surviving female victim was taken to. He requested to have chat with her before he is prepared for surgery. Detective Ronnie asked her who shot her and she said it was Caleb Young. He asked her what happened. She said she was there to visit her friend called Josh and one of Caleb's friends was there. She said she saw him on the phone and he was looking at her. She has a feeling that he was on the phone with Caleb. About 30 minutes later, Caleb popped up. Detective Ronnie asked her why he did that. She said he did that because they broke up. Detective Ronnie left the hospital room while he left the medical personnel to attend to her. Detective Ronnie called Detective Reggie immediately he left the possible. He told about Caleb Young. He wants him to look for Caleb in the database if he can get any information on him. A few minutes later, Detective Reggie found Caleb in the database. Information from the database showed that 20-year-old Caleb Young has no prior convictions. The next task for the detectives is to locate Caleb and bring him for questioning. They headed out to the location they found. While driving close to the location, they spotted Caleb leaving in a car. The detectives tracked and stopped the car and transported Caleb to homicide. With a search warrant in hand, the team searches the house but they did not find any gun. While the team was carrying out an on-site investigation, the victim's dad showed up. Did your son have a girlfriend or baby ma'am out east? A detective asked him. He claims Caleb's ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend shot up his family's house and car. Detective Ronnie said what she told them might help her son out. He asked if she will be willing to follow them. Definitely, yeah, he replied. The detectives and left with him to homicide for questioning. Detective Reggie enters the room where Caleb was being held. "How are you, brother?" he asked. "Fine," Caleb replied. Detective Reggie introduced his partner called Detective Ryden to Caleb. Detective Reggie asked him if he needed anything like water or food. He said he is good. Detective Ryden said he has 4 people shot at the moment and he doesn't know why. Back to the mobile investigation of Stephen Fields Jr., a witness has just revealed to detectives that she knows the shooter. A detective asked the witness if he can describe him. She said the suspect is 5'11", a black guy, and skinny. Smoke's wife, a detective asked. The witness said she is a white girl. He asked her how old she was. She said the information is on Facebook. The detective asked her if she can pull up her information on Facebook real quick. She said she can do it real quick. Barton finds Jamal's last known address. The detective headed to a location they know Jamal stay at. A few minutes later, they arrived at the address. When they arrived at the address, they knocked on the door. A woman showed up at the door. He told her his name is Detective Barton and he wants to know if Jamal was there. She said Jamal was not there. She said she has been trying to get in touch with him. She said she has been calling him. "Well, this is my phone number," Detective Barton said. He gave her his phone number and urged her to call him if Jamal shows up. The next day, the team picks up Donna at her apartment complex. Detective Glenn told Donna that he just wanted to speak with her. Donna said that's fine. Detective Barton told Donna to explain what happened to him. She said someone knocked on her door. She said the people used to live down the road. She said he always come hounding. She said she asked him if he has $5 she can use for gas or she can help her buy her baby diapers. Detective Barton asked her if she told her to come over to her apartment. She said she didn't tell her. Detective Barton said he didn't buy the idea that she just showed up randomly. She said she told her she was bringing money. Donna admits Stephen owed her money. Detective Barton asked her what happened when she was talking in her room. She said somebody runs in and that was when she walked outside. She said her son was in the middle of the road. She said she thought her son was dead. Detective Barton asked her if she had talked to Stephen. She said she hollered at Stephen. I asked him what he did to her son. He said Stephen came over to her son and pushed her down. She said he was irate. He was always screaming and cussing me. She said it was in the processing of getting up after he pushed her that she heard a gunshot. Then, Stephen fell. Detective Barton asked who was with him when it happened. She said it was Jamal. He asked her where the person went from there. She said she doesn't know where the boy would have gone to. Detective Barton asked her if she has ever threatened Stephen in any way. She said no. Detective Barton asked her if she does not feel somehow that Stephen dies the day he showed up at her place. In the quadruple shooting in Tulsa, detectives have just identified a suspect. The fugitive warrant squad has just brought in the suspected shooter Caleb Young. Caleb was taken to an interrogation room and prepared for questioning. Detective Reggie and Detective Ronnie entered the interrogation room to question Caleb. Detective Reggie told Caleb that he has been talking to his dad and his dad told him that he had a plan of joining the military. Caleb said he went to take his drug test today until all this happened. Detective Reggie told Caleb that he got information that somebody shoot his dad's house up. He asked him if that was correct and he said yes. Detective Reggie asked Caleb if he was around when the house got shot. Caleb said everybody was around. He said his sisters, his mom, his stepmom, and his father were all around. Detective Reggie asked him if he knows why anybody would have shot up that house. He said it was because he broke up with his girlfriend. Detective Ronnie said he guessed she has a new boyfriend. Caleb said yes. He said her new boyfriend shot up his house. Detective Ronnie asked him if he has ever met her new boyfriend before. He said he hasn't met him. He said about a month and a half ago, they called his phone talking about how they pulled up to his house. He said his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend threatened him just a day before his house was shot up. Detective Ronnie said something triggered him today. He said his friend called him and told him she was at the apartment complex. He asked Caleb where he was at that time. He said he was up north. Detective Ronnie asked Caleb if he drives to the apartment complex. He said when he arrived at the complex, what was in his mind. Caleb remained hesitant and didn't want to talk for a few minutes. But after the detectives mounted much pressure on him, he finally agreed that he shot him. Detective Ronnie asked Caleb where everybody was standing then. He said they were all standing by the stairs. Caleb said he spotted his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend and he started shooting. Detective Ronnie asked him how far away he was when the shooting started. He said he was close. Detective Ronnie asked him if he had already determined that he was going to shoot anyone he sees with his ex-girlfriend. He replied in the affirmative. Detective Ronnie told him that he said he has never seen him before. Caleb said it didn't matter to him at that time. Detective Ronnie asked Caleb if he ever thought it was a good idea that if people shot at his house, he should call the police. Caleb said he already called the police and made a complaint. He said there was nothing the police were going to do if they came back and shoot up his house. Detective Ronnie asked him if he realized that some of the people he shot are those leaving in the complex who had no idea about whatever happened between him and his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend. Caleb said he understood that completely. Caleb said people that know him know that he gets mad if someone messes with him. He said he just got to a point where he was never going to stop. Back to the mobile murder of Stephen Fields Jr., detectives need to know if a woman named Donna ever threatened him. Donna said there was no way she could take someone's life. The detective said he was not saying she took someone's life. She quickly interjected and kept saying no, no, no. The detective told Donna to stay put and he left the interrogation room. 4 hours later, detectives got a call from a tipster who gave them the location of Jamal. They tracked him down and brought him back to homicide. As soon as they arrived at homicide, Jamal was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. Detective Ronnie and Detective Jeremy were the detectives that will interrogate Jamal. Detective Ronnie asked Jamal if he needed anything before the interrogation will commence. He said he is okay and doesn't need anything. Detective Ronnie said he doesn't want to waste Jamal's time. He said he wants Jamal to tell him about what happened yesterday. He urged Jamal to tell him everything that he knows without concealing any information. Jamal said he was fixing his radiator in front of his apartment when Donna's son returned home. He said Donna's son went in and came back outside. He said Donna's son noticed an unfamiliar car that was parked in a parking spot that was reserved only for residents. He said when Donna's son asks the guy who he was, the guy asked Donna's son if he was the dude that his mother owed money. He kept repeating to Donna's son how his mother owed him money. He said after some minutes, the guy came out of his car and he said he was going to beat Donna's son's ass. Jamal said Stephen became estranged when he was confronted about his debt to Donna and hit her son. He said the next thing he heard was a bomb sound. He said when he looked back, he saw how Stephen's head hit the ground. It bounced back and hit the ground again. Detective Ronnie followed that question with another question. He told Jamal that he wants to know what else he did. Jamal said, like what in amazement. He asked Jamal where he got the gun that he used to shoot the deceased. Jamal said he got it at the safe. Detective Ronnie asked him if Mama had already left the room. He said they were already downstairs. He said he was the last person in the house. Detective Ronnie asked him what he saw when he got out of the house. He said he walked down the steps. He saw how he and Mama wanted to fight. He said he put Mama on the ground and he was already swinging on Mama. Detective Ronnie asked him what he did when he saw him swinging Mama. Jamal said he shot him. Detective Ronnie asked for a couple of minutes and left the interrogation room. Jamal Hamilton was charged with murder and he is awaiting trial. No one else has been charged in connection with the murder of Stephen Fields Jr. Fields Jr. Fields Jr. Do you need police, fire, or medical? Ask the 911 operator. I need the police. I have a body to report, replied the caller with a shaky voice. Whose body? What's going on? The 911 operator asked again. It's the next door neighbor. My roommate comes in freaking out and says the guy's dead, and he looks dead, responded the caller. The police quickly rushed down to Tulsa, Oklahoma, with their siren vehicle responding to the call the 911 operator received at 9:10 p.m. that fateful day. Police and the medical services made entry to the apartment. The living room was dark, small, and untidy, and the windows were met shut. It was not spacious at all since the little room was filled with all kinds of personal belongings and properties. At the extreme opposite to the door was a couch. A table was placed at the center of the room, separating the couch and the door. On the table were all sorts of junk and books. A man was found, snugged over the couch. We have a DOA. said one of the policemen without remorse. Then came Detective Mark Kennedy. "What's up, man?" He asked a policeman full of confidence. The policeman responded by updating him about the incident. Yet to enter the building, he brought out a pen and took some notes. He finally decided to go up and see the situation for himself, then noticed the door was not forced open, seeing the locks are still intact. He found his way into the room. He stood right in front of the dead man, who was identified as Jacob Murphy.
Jacob Murphy was a 41-year-old man, born in Louisiana. He moved to Tulsa as a child. He was a gifted musician and performed in the Tulsa choir, but worked part-time as a cook and waiter. He left behind his mother and 2 children.
Detective Kennedy's assistant brought out a touch to examine the dead man from a distance. After assessing him for some time, he then concluded he had been down for a few hours. There were clicks from a camera as a cameraman was taking pictures of the scene. "He has got an injury right there to his left wrist," added the assistant. "There will be the bullet," said Detective Kennedy responsively. Another policeman said, "There is a towel under the arm right there. Maybe he is trying to wrap it up at some point," added a voice from behind. "Quite a bit of blood," the cameraman said pitifully as he continued to flash his camera's light on everything. "Maybe there is a body shot or something." Detective Kennedy finally muttered something. The team then waited for the medical examiners to determine how Jacob died. "Does he have a phone?" asked Detective Kennedy. "No, he does not," replied his assistant confidently. Detective Kennedy jotted that down. "The dog was barking when we came in earlier," added the assistant, looking towards the direction of the restroom. "Who's the guy that reported it?" "He is in his apartment, next room," answered the assistant. Then Detective Kennedy and his team went to the neighbor's apartment. He let them in and gave them some information he might know about Jacob and how the incident happened. He mentioned that Jacob had been drinking a lot. He continued by saying Jacob was letting some friends crash his apartment, including a homeless woman named Pikachu and her boyfriend, Mike. According to him, they just moved there some weeks ago. "Do you know his phone number?" "No," the neighbor replied. "You know he got a phone number, right?" "Yes," he responded. "Can you give me a description of Mike?" "Mike is a black dude, frequently found around the neighborhood. He lived with his mom, I guess, and was thrown out on the street. He came to Jacob and Jacob let him stay with him. Why will someone want to hurt him?" "I don't know," replied the neighbor in despair. "Jacob is a good guy who wants to help everybody out." As Detective Kennedy asks the question, he jots down the neighbor's response, while his assistant takes note of the neighbor's expression. They thanked him for the cooperation and left the apartment. The man was terrified. His hands were shaking as though he was suffering from electric shock. He folded himself up. He looked suspicious though, but his feebleness showed that he was just scared. While Detective Kennedy went back to the homicide to interview the witness, LT, Chase Calhoun, Kennedy's assistant, was in the car where he reached out to Corporal Schilling at the headquarters to help identify Jacob's friends. "I was looking for Mike and her girlfriend nicknamed Pikachu," said Calhoun. "Every report that I found that references Pikachu is this Sheila Sierra. She has a boyfriend by the name Michael Bowen. They frequent that area right around where this happened, so I would say they are pretty likely going to be the pair," replied Schilling from the phone. Calhoun found the picture of the woman Schilling was describing on his small computer. He thanked Schilling and drove off in the car, saying these folks are not going to be outside. They are going to be ducked out as he looked out in the dark through the car's window.
Still driving, Calhoun's phone rang. He checked and received it. It was Kennedy. Kennedy told him he had found the address of Jacob's parents. "Okay, sounds good," replied Calhoun. Calhoun immediately navigated his car according to the address sent to him by Kennedy.
He arrived at a big, white-story building with a big tree in front. There was a small lawn just in front of the building. Calhoun walked up the part to the door. He knocked at the door and someone responded by flashing a touch on his face. He introduced himself, then he asked, "Are you related to Mr. Jacob Murphy?" "I am his mom," replied the person with the touch. The woman came out to Calhoun and the two walked down to the shed of the big tree in front of the house. Calhoun shared with the woman that her son had been shot. "I hate to tell you, your son had passed away," he added bitterly. He placed his left hand on her right shoulder, consoling her. I know this is overwhelming, but it is really important now that you tell me about who he has been dealing with, requested Calhoun with the voice of an angel. There is a couple that Jacob was saying, Mom, they're just real nice. They're real sweet. They're just down on their luck. And he was letting them sleep in his bedroom, replied Jacob's mom. Was that a black man named Mike? Yeah. And a white woman named Sheila? Sheila might be right, Jacob's mom responded aptly to Calhoun questions. He's been helping, trying to help different people. She added, trying to hide her soberness, even though it was clear she'll soon burst into tears. Calhoun, trying to figure out a motive, asked her if Jacob had been having issues with drugs lately. No, she responded with apt. I had trouble with him drinking. He had depression from being injured. His arms were messed up from breaking them skating with his son, and the doctor messed up on the surgery. He's been fighting pain specialists to stay off drugs, she said conclusively, trying not to make a wimp. Then she continued, speaking with a few breaks in her voice, crying as she said he has been working a little bit at Ty's, the restaurant, so he had cash on him. He could work a few hours and not hurt. Jaeger. She bawled as if she just woke Yo from her sleep. Is his dog still there? She asked doubtfully. There was a German Shepherd there. We had to put him in the bathroom, answered Calhoun swiftly. If he felt like it was somebody that was threatening, he would have been protective of Jacob. Jacob's mother said with a little bit of hope. Sure, that's all for now, ma'am. We will be calling you if we get some more information. I am sorry for your loss, he concluded. Jacob's mom starts crying as she tries to speak. He said to her it's all right as he found his way back to his car in the dark. Kennedy was now in his office. His phone rang. He picked it, and a thick masculine voice was heard. He recognizes it as one of the detectives still processing the crime scene. He had a contact wound to his chest. He definitely was shot, said the voice from the phone. You still can't find his cell phone, right? Asked Kennedy. The voice answered, yeah, then continued. He had money in his wallet. Nothing looked like they were looking for drugs and money. The voice said frankly. All right, sounds good, responded Kennedy, then hung up the call. In Kennedy's office was another man, a detective too perhaps. The man gave some information on Jacob that he saw. The victim has a contusion on his head and he has an imprint on his face. Maybe the man with the gun poked him in the face with it, said the other man in the room. Kennedy then turned facing the other man in the room. The man was standing, resting his hand on a box placed over the table while assisting his head to stay in place. The man was wearing a badge t-shirt just like Kennedy's, but black, while Kennedy had a red one on. He had his ID worn around his neck. He seems to be Kennedy's partner. We don't have a phone. They didn't take anything else. Somebody could have actually taken the phone. Maybe he had something important on it, Kennedy said. The witness, Jacobs' neighbor who had the shooting, was in the interrogation room. His hands were cuffed to the back of the chair he was sitting. He doesn't understand English as he's not an American. Kennedy got himself a translator to help with that. Let's go round up here and see what we got, he said, getting already worked up. So, basically, I just want to know what he heard, what he saw, and what he noticed, said Kennedy. The translator sitting next to Kennedy relayed the information to the witness, who was sitting at the other end of the table, in an unusual language. The witness responded in the same unusual language. I got home around 4 in the afternoon. There were about 6 people in the parking lot. He identified the people by their gender, 2 females and 4 guys. Kennedy shows him a picture he had on his phone. Have you seen that woman before? He asked. I think she is the one who was there, the witness replied. In fact, she was with the black male, he added. It was around 5 or 5:30 p.m., he continued. And suddenly I heard some kind of gunshot. I turned to the apartment. A black guy and a white guy came out, and seconds after, the guy who was with the woman came out, and they went toward the park up there. He concluded. The female did not come out, asked Kennedy confusedly. No, the witness replied. Kennedy then asked him if he would be able to identify the people who ran out of the apartment if he was to see them again. I'm not so sure, the witness responded. Kennedy, getting frustrated by not getting too far yet, showed the witness a picture of Mike from his phone, and asked, "Did you see that guy in there?" Instead, the witness started describing who he saw. He said, "The guy I saw had much bigger hair and his face was a little bit thinner. In fact, he doesn't look like him," he added swiftly. Kennedy and the translator thanked the witness and walked out of the interrogation room, leaving him behind still cuffed. Kennedy returned to his office. This time Corporal Nathan Schilling was there. The two were talking about Sheila Sierra. Sheila was familiar to them. She has prior conviction for controlled substance with the intent to distribute and possession of firearm while in commission of a felony. "That house that we pulled 15 people out of that one time?" asked Schilling. "Yeah, that's where she's from," responded Kennedy. "We better hit that house right now," said Schilling. "If we hit that house, we will have to dig. We will have more people in the day than we will do now." Next morning, Kennedy and the team head for the house where she is known to hang out in a red pickup. They got to a rusty neighborhood. The vehicle stopped in front of a small apartment. The men walked to the house and knocked at the door. A man and a woman answered the door. "We're looking for Pikachu," requested Kennedy. "The Pikachu stayed down here at the fourplex, the end of the apartment facing mine," the women from the house described. "When was the last time you saw her?" asked Kennedy. "They were at Quick Trip yesterday. I saw her arguing with Mark," the woman replied. "Mike was drunk," she continued. "His mom moved over around 31st. Kennedy thanked the woman and returned to the police station.
The team found a name for Mike's mother. They ran it, but she doesn't have a recent address or file. The computer operator finally found a place registered in her name.
A phone rang. "It's Margaret," the policeman said. He then read out the address forwarded to his phone to the other policeman. Driving the red Ford Jeep on a highway, the other policeman nodded. "If they've got a car, that means they're mobile. They can be anywhere," added the policeman with the phone. The detective searched the neighborhood looking for the white woman. He called upon a random woman and asked if she had seen Pikachu lately. "I haven't seen her since probably yesterday," the man replied. "She said he saw him at the apartment." The fourplex. "Yeah," the woman responded to Kennedy's question. "When I went there, nobody would answer," continued the woman. "Do you see a guy in there?" "I'd seen a guy with his head down on the coffee table. I thought he had just passed out, but the woman kept replying to Kennedy. "So, I just left," she muttered. "And he wasn't murdered? Was there really?" This time replying with another question. The woman is sounding scared. "Yeah," replied Kennedy. "I thought the guy had just passed out," the woman said softly, almost crying. "Oh my God. Sir, if I'd known there was something wrong. Oh my God." The woman is now terrified. "You said you were there yesterday." "Yes." "Why did you go there?" "Because I wanted to see Pika," the woman said, weeping. "Okay, Pika is your friend." "Yes." "Do you know where she lives?" "No." The woman is now sobbing badly. Kennedy then showed her a picture from his phone. "Is that her boyfriend?" The woman nodded. "Yeah, I'm scared of him." "Why are you scared of him?" Kennedy asked. "He's getting more interested, seeing that this might lead somewhere." "'Cause he hit me," the woman said shamefully. "Why did he hit you?" "Getting more interested, 'cause he thought I stole some weed or something, and I didn't." The woman kept responding even though she's already terrified. "All right, I appreciate it, thank you," Kennedy said, letting the woman out of his car. "All right," the woman replied as she stepped out of Kennedy's vehicle. Kennedy then drove off, navigating back to the main road. 2 hours later, in the search for Mike and Sheila. "All right, so I posted that address. He's an associate." A voice sounded for the telecommunication device. "White Pontiac in the driveway," the voice concluded. "That's it." The policeman driving the red Ford Jeep said, and his companion shrugged in conclusion. Then the driving policeman said, "Mike and I are going to set off here, in case someone takes off running out through here." He then parked his car a few miles away from the suspected hideout. One of the officers at the suspected hideout spotted Sheila and Mike. "They're coming out," an officer in another vehicle said before driving towards the hideout. "Tulsa police," an officer shouted. "Good morning. Do you know Murphy?" asked Kennedy. "Yeah," replied Sheila. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Yeah," Sheila responded again. "I've seen on the news," she then uttered. "We want more than that," replied Kennedy. "You're coming with me," he added as they walked away. Mike, cuffed and secured by a policeman, looked at Sheila and Kennedy as they walked away. The patrol found its way back to Tulsa Police Station. Kennedy and the policeman driving the red Ford Jeep, Detective Ronnie Leatherman, entered the interrogation room where Sheila was already waiting for them. "I know yesterday something happened at Jacob's apartment, so tell me what happened," Kennedy said, starting the conversation. Sheila admitted she and Mike were at Jacob's with her cousin, his wife, and one of Mike's friends. "This is about what time?" asked Kennedy. "About 3:30 or 4, replied Sheila aptly. "I and Mike had a fight, but I left," she continued. "Mike and his friend stayed behind." She stopped. "What do you know about the shooting?" Leatherman finally asked. He was sitting at the corner the whole time, noticing what was going on. She said last night she learned Jacob was dead. Kennedy lost his patient. "Be straight with me," he said at the top of his voice. "Mike said he doesn't want me there," she replied. "Did Mike tell you he shot Dave?" asked Leatherman. "No, sir," she responded, keeping her cool. "I know Jacob ended up grabbing him by his throat, and he ended up pushing the door away and—" "Is that the time something bad happens?" asked Kennedy after noticing her silence for some seconds. "Yeah," she replied. "So, Mike told you that much? If you don't tell me what happened, you'll be getting yourself into a big SHT. Mike utters those words angrily. Sheila wanted to reply, but she ended up crying instead. Jacob's got a dog, and the dog bit him. "So, I guess the bullet missed." Sheila finally said something. Kennedy was stunned, sitting on the chair, and Leatherman was already on his feet. The two couldn't say a word. Instead, they left the interrogation room, leaving Sheila behind. "I don't think she's telling us the whole truth," Leatherman commented. To know what Sheila was holding back, the team sent in Sean Duff. Sean Duff had known Sheila for years. She knew Sheila as a victim of addiction, and later on she realized she had been socially abused by Mike. She didn't blame her for her choice of boyfriend, but pitied her. Duff entered the interrogation room. She met Sheila face down. "What happened?" "I had you down here and I came to find out what's going on," said Duff, being concerned. Sheila raised up her head and said as she cried, "I wasn't there. If they found out you're saying something else, they will send you to prison." Duff whispered, "Do not defend somebody else that F. King hurt you." She continued, "I know, but he's the guy I loved," answered Sheila. Before Kennedy and Leatherman interrogate Mike, Watson checked up his criminal history. He found out that Michael Bowen was once convicted for carrying a firearm without a license. "Mike, Sheila has told me her side of the story. I will give you the opportunity to tell your side of the story, because there are two sides of the story," Kennedy said as he and Leatherman went in to interrogate Mike. Mike said he wasn't there at all. "That was a different story from what Sheila told me," Kennedy said. He later agreed he was there. "I was just like, yo, get rid of it. Who knows what the hell he did with it?" Mike spoke as though he was uninterested. The detective got his friend's number. "What are the odds of me going home?" he asked. "To be honest with you, probably not good," replied Kennedy. Kennedy and Leatherman left. Another policeman came in and cuffed Mike. He then took Mike out with him. After reasoning on the issue, the team identified it as first-degree murder. They found Mike's friend. He has been interrogated. He gave the team every info they asked for. Later, he was permitted to leave. Mike was sent to life imprisonment for first-degree murder, and Sheila handed 8 years for felony. Kennedy then called Jacob's mom and updated her on the progress so far. How many murders happen every day across the globe? Is it the police or the government's fault, or the blame goes to someone entirely different? What do you think? When it comes to crimes, there's a lot of questions, but not so many answers. So many unsolved crimes, so many lost people that were never seen again, so many broken hearts left. This story begins on a very cold night in January, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Life is so unpredictable, even at 1:45 a.m., when you must be warm in your bed having your best sleep, excited for what tomorrow brings. Little did we know that the world would wake up with terrible news, other murders. 3 people were murdered, a 58-year-old black male called Kenneth Sellers and a 52-year-old woman along with her 28-year-old son. Where can we start? Just like every crime story, even this story begins with a 911 call. On the north side, a man in the neighborhood where the murders took place heard a woman screaming and noises of gunshots. He decided to call and explain what he heard. After some time, the police arrive at the place where the shooting happened. They decide to not waste time and get in the house as fast as they can, in case someone needed help. Unfortunately, there were 3 victims. When the police got in the house, they noticed that the victims weren't standing in the same room when the murder happened. It looked like they died exactly where they were before the tragedy happened. Almost like execution style, said the police officer. However, each of the victims has a name, each of them has a story. The first victim was standing by the door, the youngest one, the son of the mother, a 28-year-old, named Thomas. He attended Central High School in Tulsa. He was self-employed. He was shot in the chest and his head. The second victim noticed was murdered in the hallway, the 52-year-old woman, shot in her chest. The house was owned by the mother and her son. They lived together. The 58-year-old victim, called Kenneth Sellers, was the last one to be seen by the police. He was murdered in the bedroom of the house. He was on his knees next to the bed. He, too, was shot in the chest and his abdomen. We can surely say that Kenneth and the woman might have been in a relationship together. His sister confirmed it and told us that he was staying there for a whole week. Kenneth Sellers was born and raised in Oklahoma. He worked as a welder for over 10 years. He came from a big family, the youngest of 5. Kenneth, unfortunately, leaves behind 6 children and 9 grandchildren. I'm pretty sure he is very missed. When the police arrived at the house, they noticed that both doors were open. The front door of the house and the back door of the house. The back door of the house didn't look like it was forced to be opened. It seemed that the one that got in pretty easily and knew his intentions. The house was in terrible condition. It's quite the mess, Sarge, says the police officer. In the back of the house, the bedroom had been tossed. The killer, who came into the house, was for sure looking for something he knew that it was there. Perhaps something he owned, something that was borrowed from him. There were clothes, blood everywhere. The drawers were out. What were they looking for? There were a bunch of empty plastic bags on the floor. I guess they took for what they were looking for, drugs. There was some blood in the bed, in the pillows. There is a casting there too, said the police officer. Detectives believe that the young 28-year-old victim was shot in the right side of the bedroom. Then he ran out of there while rubbing up against the wall as he is going. The wall had blood prints. Then he ran over to the living room, where he collapsed and died there. As they were going around the house, the police officers saw that there were castings all over the house. There were 9mm shell castings. As the team was searching for fingerprints and DNA samples, the rest of the team got informed that the neighbor that had called 911, that heard someone scream so loud, that was the 28-year-old victim's girlfriend. She was already transported downtown to be asked questions about this tragedy. She might know something. She might even be the killer itself. We're about to find out. The girlfriend of the victim has a child, a 5-year-old, a daughter. She left the child to her sisters to babysit. She was the first one to get questioned about this whole situation. The police hoped that she would say something useful. And there she was. She looked scared. She was shaking. Her voice was shaking. The first thing that came out of her mouth was, "Why did they do that to my baby?" She was talking about her boyfriend, the young victim, Thomas. The only thing she seemed to care about was if they are dead or not. She goes, "Can I ask you one thing? Are they dead?" And when the police confirmed that they are dead, she busted into tears immediately. The officer said, "I'm sorry for your loss, but we don't even know what relationship you had with the victim." She explained while crying that they had been dating a couple of months and that he used to sleep multiple times over at her house. That night the victim was staying at her apartment. The officer said, "What happened?" She started telling things in detail, as if the victim has said to her, "I want you to go with me so we can go get stuff from the house." The girlfriend said no because it was too late. They had to lay and sleep. But the girlfriend said that she does her washing at the victim's house. She said she washes her clothes and her baby's clothes there. So, she had to take some laundry from the victim's house and agreed to go without asking too much. The 28-year-old victim, Thomas, told to his girlfriend that his friend Melvin is coming too. The police officer asked her about this guy named Melvin. She said they were friends. Well, that they recently became friends. She says that Melvin used to always steal from her boyfriend. The victim, she says he came to her apartment. The police officer asked her about her daughter and who she was at the moment with. She said she left her child with her sister and her sister's boyfriend, saying that she isn't her blood sister, but she stays directly right across the hall from her apartment. The police officer asks, "So this Melvin comes at your apartment, picks you and your boyfriend, and you go where?" She answers with no hesitation, "We get in the car, me, Melvin, and my boyfriend. There was some other dude that I've never seen before," she says. Detective Mark Kennedy asked her, "What was the purpose of this ride? Tell us." She said that she had no idea. She didn't ask a question. She had to take some laundry and that's it. She says, "Sir, it was my only opportunity. I don't have a car." However, she continues with the story. "We arrived at the house. We go right around the corner to 29th, where the shooting happened. The first to get out of the car was my boyfriend. In the car, it was only me, Melvin, and the other unknown guy. The other guy that I didn't even know who it is, not even his name, left the car too." She says Melvin was in the front seat, and she was in the back seat. She says they were taking so long. All of a sudden, Melvin speaks on the phone with someone and says that he had to go and take his girlfriend. It sounded so fishy, like something bad would happen. She didn't believe it. She said to Melvin that they should wait for the others. He started the car, but I insisted and said no. She started screaming and saying, "No, take me back to go and take my man. What are you doing? Why would you leave them?" He wasn't even responding. He just drove to the corner of the street and came back. At this moment, she knew something bad is gonna happen. Or at least something bad just happened, but she didn't know yet. She said that it wasn't even a minute, that they just looped. And we go back at the front of the house. I go in the house and see that. She says, boom, he goes off and I see that. I walk in the house to that. By that meaning she saw what happened. Officer goes, "So, who is the killer?" She goes, "The man that went out of the car." But she had no clue who that was. The only things that she said were, he had a black hoodie, he was brown-skinned, Melvin knows him. The police ask her about Melvin. Who is he? How old is he? And much more. She tells that Melvin is between 2 to 6-year-old. He stays in Gilcrease Hills with his dad. She says that she doesn't know Melvin's last name. This information was so good for the police and for the family's victims that deserve to know who is the killer if the girlfriend is being completely honest. Detective Diana Bauman decided to search for a man named Melvin in Gilcrease, a man in his 22nd that is living in the Gilcrease Hills neighborhood. Luckily, they did find a possible match, a photo so they can show it to her and see if Melvin is the one that we're looking for, the possible killer. He is Melvin Porter. The detective shows to the girl a picture of Melvin and asks her, "Who's that?" And she immediately recognizes him. She says that he is the one that she is talking about. The investigators ask her, "Let's go back to the beginning. Tell us the previous story that Melvin and the victim had." She says that probably a week and a half ago, the victim, her boyfriend, gave Melvin $300 to buy him a gun, a 9mm handgun. But Melvin never gave him the gun. He kept the gun for himself, and this is why they had fallen out. She believes that everything started because of this argument between Melvin and the victim. Everything about the gun. So, when did they make up? They asked her. They had made up and become friends on the same day that the victim was shot to death. She said because apparently, Melvin gave back everything he owned to the 28-year-old victim. The investigators asked her if her boyfriend sold drugs. She told the police that the victim used to sell drugs. "I know he previously has. He just did 17 months for that," she says. They asked her about what kind of drugs he sold. Marijuana, cocaine, but she didn't know. As Detective Mark Kennedy was talking with the girlfriend's victim, some of the police officers also went to her house to check out her child, only to find out that she had left her child alone in her house and lied about it. Her daughter is only 5-year-old. How can you leave a child alone at home with everything that's going around the world? Since she lied about this, what about other stuff? Can we trust her? Is there more to the story? Detective Mark Kennedy asked her about her daughter and she admitted to leaving her child at home but insisted that everything she said was true and she could be trusted. She felt sorry for leaving her daughter alone in the apartment. The patrol went into searching for the 25 Melvin Porter in Gilcrease Hills, hoping that his story is gonna match with the girl's story. This was a brutal crime that 3 people died from it. "I want to know who did it," says Detective Mark Kennedy. 3 hours later, patrol radio hits with the news that they found him and arrested him for drug trafficking. He had drugs, meth, he had 37 grams on him. It was time to hear Melvin's story. Detective Mark Kennedy introduces himself to Melvin and starts asking him questions. Melvin seemed so chill, not nervous at all, saying that he had nothing to do with the triple homicide and that he hadn't been there that night, only some hours before, but not when they were shot to death. He tells that he was there that day, at the victim's house, and told who it was there, his friend, his mom, and Thomas's mother's boyfriend. He says that Melvin and the victim were childhood friends. Melvin explained what kind of car he was driving, Ford Focus, what hour, and where he went next. When the police told him about what the victim's girlfriend told him, he just laughed and said that it wasn't true. Melvin said, "That's stupid. I don't care what she said to you all. I wasn't with her that night." He doesn't seem to like the victim's girlfriend. The detective notices and asks him what's your problem with her. He kept saying how she always used to steal from the victim, how she always used to be high on drugs, how she always used to stalk behind the victim's back. The detective asks Melvin if he has ever bought a gun for the victim, as the girl said. But Melvin said no. He said that he bought the gun for himself. "Where's the gun?" asks Detective Kennedy. Melvin said that he took the gun to clean it, saying that he has the receipt too. The detective asks him when was the last time he was in contact with the victim. He says that it was that day of the death of the victim and that he called him asking for drugs, for some weed. "But that didn't happen. What about the meth you had today with you?" asks Kennedy. "Did you take that from him?" "No," says Melvin. The police don't know what to believe anymore and time was running fast. Detective Mark Kennedy asks for evidence for a surveillance video of the victim's girlfriend's apartment. He might find a video of the entrance of her apartment. But then Detective Bauman goes through Melvin's phone and finds some very helpful texts. They discover a text that he shared with the 28-year-old victim, saying, "Bro, what's taking so long?" Does that mean that the girlfriend's victim was right? Melvin was there waiting in the car that night right outside the victim's house. The detective asks Melvin about this text and he says that he meant it for today. That they talked about finding him drugs but it didn't happen. Melvin still gives nothing. No clues. The girlfriend's victim gets arrested for child neglect. Melvin gets arrested for drug trafficking. But there's still a third person that we don't know who he is and what he did yet. Maybe he is the answer to all this messy big puzzle. They decided once again to look closer to Melvin's texts. Nowadays you can find a lot about a person through his phone. CPL Nathan Schilling discovered that Melvin texted someone that day before midnight saying, "Need a gun," hours before the murder happened. We're getting closer to finding out, I think. The same person that Melvin texted, that person texted back hours after the murder time saying, "I need some clean clothes, bro." His name was Christopher President. This person got some explaining to do. It seemed like he is the shooter. Investigators do their work, and they find a pic of Christopher President. Some information. Christopher President, a 27-year-old black man, was charged with a lot of stuff, burglary, drug possession, and much more. A father, has a son, a wife, a family. The investigation in Melvin's phone continues. They find that after the shooting, that night, Melvin has searched on Google about news about this case and downloaded a police scanner app. Melvin has been lying all this time, meaning that he is guilty of something. Is Christopher President the shooter, and Melvin's just a getaway ride? Getaway of a cold, brutal murder. All of this progress was made within just 48 hours. 2 days later, the videos of the girlfriend's victim's entrance apartment were sent to the office. Melvin said he never came to the girlfriend's house, so let's see the truth. And there it was, Melvin's car, a Ford Focus, just like he said, matching the same time frame. The girlfriend's victim was right all this time. Melvin was at her house, picking up both the girlfriend and the victim, then driving to the house where the shooting made place. The video was clear. Melvin wasn't who he said he was. 1 month into the investigation, the officers decide that they have enough proofs to charge Melvin for murder. He was still in jail for drug trafficking. It's his last chance to tell us exactly what happened and all about this Christopher President guy. So they went to Osage County Jail and Sheriff's Office, where he was being held. The detective started asking questions. Melvin still kept denying it. Nearly 3 weeks later, Margaret Hain Bell, Tulsa PD, discovered by locating the locations of both Melvin and Christopher's phones around that same time when the murder took place and found out that these two were together that night at the victim's locations. 1 month into the investigation, and they decide that it is enough evidence and decide to arrest Melvin. Now it was time for that detective Mark Kennedy to collect the DNA of fingerprints and the samples of the crime scene and see if it would match with our wanted Christopher President. After 2 weeks of searching for Christopher, the gang unit found him at his mother's house, arrested him for an unrelated outstanding warrant. The detective started to ask him questions, and after that, he would serve Christopher with his DNA buccal swab. He seemed nervous. They asked him about that the night of January 16th. He said that he has known about this case since his friend was arrested. His friend is Melvin. He knew the 28-year-old victim too, saying that he was friends with him too, that he was been at his house several weeks before he got shot to death. When asked if he was with Melvin that night, Christopher said no. He said that on the 15th of January, hours before the murder, his girlfriend gave birth to a boy. He was at the hospital. Melvin called just to say congrats to him, so Christopher asked for some drugs, pills, or something from Melvin since he got anxious about the fact that he became a father. He couldn't sleep. It helps with my anxiety, he says. So they went to a bar. They went to a bar near his mother's house, near the victim's house. After the bar, Melvin drove him back to the hospital by his car, a Ford Focus. The detective asks about where he spent the rest of the night, and he says at the hospital. But his phone tells a different story. Christopher is making up a whole other story, so the investigator tells him the GPA coordinates, everything, and that night he was near the victim's house. The detective decides to call the lab and make the case even stronger. To see if his DNA profile matches, they asked him to open his mouth so they can take pieces of his DNA. After some time of waiting, the lab found no matches with Christopher's DNA. Kinda disappointing. However, the investigators put everything together, every piece of evidence, and the court decided to charge Christopher President with murder. They decided there was enough evidence. Christopher President was convicted of 3 counts of felony murder and 1 count of armed robbery. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Melvin, on the other hand, was convicted of 3 counts of felony murder and 1 count of armed robbery. He was too sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The 28-year-old victim's girlfriend pleaded guilty to child neglect and was sentenced to a 3-year suspended sentence and probation. However, she was not charged in connection with murders. The victim's girlfriend was a very big help in this case. This was a very brutal crime that has come to an end finally. This happened only because people are greedy. Greedy for money, drugs, for having things that don't belong to them. So greedy that sometimes they forget the value of life. How precious life is. How can you take innocent people's lives? People shouldn't suffer. Their life shouldn't end for others people wants. But who is to blame really? Police, government. People, you choose. 7 p.m. in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A caller called 911. The caller says he is calling for something that he just saw on 75. He said there are 3 cars on the side of the road. He said as he was approaching them, one gentleman jumped out of his car and ran to the car directly behind him. He said it looked like a gentleman started punching the driver. He said somebody is going to need some help there. The 911 operator said he was going to notify officers. The first respondent arrived and they found an avalanche in another Honda in the middle of the highway. They also saw a woman with a gunshot in the passenger seat of the Honda. Unfortunately, they found the woman dead before they could get to her. A 23-year-old detective, Reggie Warren, who joined homicide 3 months ago, will lead the case. This will be the second case he will be leading since he joined homicide. Juan is also a singer who sings on occasions when he is not working. Former homicide detective Justin is the one supervising the scene. According to a witness on the scene, the victim was seen breaking into the avalanche. The witness said the owner shows up in that avalanche. He said he believed the owner had an altercation with the white guy in the Honda. The white guy driving the Honda had fled the scene. He said the bullet penetrated the victim's head and neck. Because the owner of the Honda had fled the scene, the officers cannot search the car unless they have a warrant. The man who fought the man in the Honda stayed on the scene. Detectives took him into the car and made their way back to homicide for questioning. Detective Reggie said he will like to speak to the 2 witnesses who drove by after the shooting. As soon as they arrived at homicide, Detective Reggie started the interrogation with the man who fought the man in the Honda. Then, tell me what happened, Detective Reggie asked. He said his daughter needed to get to work. so he came to pick her up with the avalanche. He said as soon as he pulled over, he saw two men jump out from his car, and they ran through to the Honda. He said he asked them what they wanted to do, and they told him they were going to shoot his black ass. He said the driver of the Honda pulled a gun at him. He said when he saw the gun, he tried to push him and he started jostling with him. He said it was during that process that he heard a sound from the gun. 4 a.m. in Mobile, Alabama, a call came in from a club on the east side. The 911 operator picks the call and asked where the location of the emergency of the caller was. Shotgun Willie, who called in, said they just saw someone come in and shoot somebody. The caller said one of their security guards is bleeding on the ground unconscious. He said he is not breathing. He is also not moving. Oh my God, says the caller. A team of policemen rushed to the scene and found a man lying dead on the floor. Detective Julius Nettles will lead the investigation. Any identification on him? A policeman on the scene of the incident asked. No, another officer replied. He told them to check his pockets if they could find anything. 40 years old Jeremy is the victim. He had a passion for fixing cars. He has been working as a security guard at the club for the past years. He lives behind a loving family. The team finds several bullet fragments at the scene of the incident. Is there any witness to this? An officer asked. Oh yes, one of the bartenders, another officer replied. The detective goes to the bartender to have a chat with him. He asked him what happened. The bartender said the gentleman that shot Jeremy was just so intoxicated. He said he was kind of being rude and just a little obnoxious. He said the shooter was at his bar and went over there and poured a beer out on the floor. He said when Jeremy saw that he was pouring beer on the floor, he went there and told him to leave. He said the shooter didn't want to leave, and so Jeremy just reached around and got him in a chokehold. He said it stops and the man said something and went outside. He said after some time, the man comes back in and they just heard all the shots. The detective asked the bartender how much time the killer stood outside before he came back in. The bartender said 45 seconds. The detective asked him if he knows the person, and the bartender said he knows his face. He said he has seen him before. The detective asked him to describe the killer. He said he is in his mid-30 seconds, short and stocky. The detective asked if he is black or white, and he said he is black. 1 hour in, the team discovered the shooting may have been cut in on surveillance of the club. They started the video minutes before Jeremy was shot. From the video, they were able to ascertain the story of the bartender who was a witness. The video has finally revealed who the killer was. Anybody knows who the suspect is? A detective asked. He got no reply, which means none of the officers knows the suspect. Later, the bartender gives the team a credit card receipt signed by the suspect. The receipt showed that the shooter is Dwayne. 35 years old Dwayne has prior convictions including second-degree forgery and second-degree assault. Before heading back to homicide, Detective Nettles and Detective Butner decided to notify Jeremy's family about the incident. The two detectives arrived at Jeremy's house and they knocked on the door. Jeremy's grandmother came out to see who was at the door. She met the two officers who introduced themselves and she allowed them in. Detectives spoke with Jeremy's grandmother who raised him as a son. They left after the conversation. 4 hours in, Detective Jeff and Detective Germain head out to show the line up to the bartender who witnesses the shooting. When they got to his home, they tendered the photographs. Detective Jeff told the bartender to take a look at the photo. Angela was survived by 2 sisters and 5 children. After some hours, Detective Jason White looks her up in a database and gets an address for her family members. When the team got here, they met a member of Angela's family, and they informed her about the death of Angela. Detective Reggie told her how important it is to get Angela's killer. Detective Reggie told her that the killer is in his 30 seconds. He is either short hair or bald. But the family member doesn't know who Angela has been hanging out with. The team thanked her and headed back to homicide. A few hours later, Detective Jason White forwards the team a possible lead from an ATF agent. Back to the murder of 40-year-old security guard Jeremy Smith. Detectives hope their witness can identify Dwayne as the shooter. The team searches for his last known address and headed there immediately they found it. Detective Nettles and another officer knocked on the door of the apartment and a woman answers the door. Detective Nettle asked her if Dwayne was there and she replied by saying Dwayne would have come out if he was there. She said Dwayne used to live there but he and his girlfriend have left the apartment several months ago. A detective finds Dwayne's girlfriend in the database and gets her phone number. The team put a call through to Dwayne's girlfriend and she gave them her address. On their way to Dwayne's girlfriend's house, Dwayne's mom put a call through to the team and told them she and Dwayne would be at the police headquarters in 30 minutes. After some minutes, Dwayne's girlfriend arrived at homicide. She said she heard that Dwayne might have shot somebody. The team asked her where she heard that. She said people have been calling her phone all day. The team asked her when was the last time she talked to Dwayne, and she told them around 4 o'clock in the morning. She said Dwayne came through the door and he was like, they are coming for me. Back to the murder of 46-year-old Angela. Detectives just received a tape that a man reached out to an attorney and said he was involved in the shooting. The name of the man is Matthew Elijah. 34-year-old Matthew Elijah has prior convictions including assault with a deadly weapon. 20 minutes later, Matthew reaches out to an attorney. Some hours later, Matthew put a call through to homicide and agrees to turn himself in. He gave them an address where he will be waiting for them. The team got into the car and headed to the address Matthew gave them. When the team arrived at the address, they surveyed the area waiting for Matthew to approach them. One of the team members who was standing at another place radioed the team members and told them he has a visual on Matthew. He told them Matthew is walking southbound, drinking at 40, and wearing a ball cap. Matthew was finally apprehended and brought to homicide. Detective Reggie reaches out to the man who fought with Matthew at the scene to see if he can identify Matthew. Back to the murder of Jeremy Smith. The team hopes the suspect, who is Dwayne's girlfriend, can explain why Dwayne may have pulled the trigger. She said Dwayne was like, they are coming. The detective asked if he said anything other than that. She said that was what he said and he went right on back out after that. The detective asked if he had a gun at that point and she said she did not see a gun with him at that point because his pants were way down. The detective asked if she tried to call him after that. She said she called but she got no response. The detective appreciated Dwayne's girlfriend for being truthful with him and left the interrogation room. After some minutes, Dwayne's mother brought him to homicide as she promised earlier. It was time for questioning. A detective entered the interrogation room where Dwayne was being held. He told Dwayne that they had already seen the video of what happened. What they just wanted to know is why he did what he did. Dwayne told the officer that he was not ready to say anything. The detective left the interrogation room in surprise. The team went back to the video to see if there is any reason why Dwayne would not want to talk, but they could not find any. The team concluded that Dwayne would be charged for murder. 12 hours into the next 48, Detective Nettles closed his case. 8:08 p.m. in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A caller called 911. 911 operator. Do you need police, fire, or medical? Caller, police. The caller said he is at the corner of 54th Street and Johnstown. He said he just heard a gunshot after an argument, and the argument stopped after the argument. 911 operator. How many gunshots did you hear? Caller, just one. The 911 operator said he will inform the police. A few minutes later, another caller called 911. 911 operator, this is EMSA. What is your emergency? Caller, I was just walking up the street and I look up in the driveway and I saw a guy sitting in a chair with a gunshot wound to his head. 911 operator, is there more than one wound? The caller said he just saw one that is coming out of the man's head. 911 operator, okay. Caller, God. 911 operator, is he still breathing? Caller, yes, he is still breathing. 911 operator, just keep talking to him. Tell him you've got help on the way. Detectives made their way to the crime scene. They found a man lying wounded with gunshot wounds. Is he bleeding via a gunshot wound? A detective asked. Yes, another detective answered. Detectives said the victim is in grave condition. He should be taken to St. John's Hospital. For homicide detectives, their chance of solving a murder is cut in half if they do not get a lead within the first 48 hours. Detectives are heading to North Tulsa. There was a black male that was shot at the front of his residence. Health officials have been working on him, and detectives just got a word that unfortunately, he died at the hospital. Victim seated in his chair, a detective asked. Yeah, someone replied. He said apparently when they were out there, he had a hospital bracelet worn with the name Sydney on it. The victim did, a detective asked again. The victim did. He replied. 55 years old Sydney Ray was born and raised in Tulsa. After earning a bachelor's in communications, he served in the Army for a year and a half before being honorably discharged. When he returned home, he attended truck driving school and worked as a landscaper. He was survived by his mother and 3 children. A detective said he believed that Sydney was shot. He said he was shot once. He said the bullet didn't pass all the way through but stayed in his head. Sydney was shot once on the right side of his head. A detective at the crime scene said he is not seeing any blood spatter on the wall or anything. He said what this tells him is that Sydney was probably leaning forward when he was shot. In the course of searching the crime scene, a detective saw a 9mm casing and 2 different types of cigarettes. So, who else lives in this house? A detective asked. No one answered the door. Another detective replied. A female detective at the crime scene said she has talked to the person that owns the house. She said the owner of the house told her that Sydney and 2 other people lived in the house. She said she gave her the name of the 2 other people. Perfect, a detective answered. Patrol learned that Sydney's housemates have been out of town for 4 days. What this shows is that Sydney was at home alone when he was shot. Only the neighbor who called 911 would be able to provide some information that can give detectives a lead. Detectives have a witness. She said she hears Sydney arguing with someone moments before the shooting, but she didn't hear what they were saying. She said she heard the suspect talking to someone. Like shoot him, a detective asked. Yeah, just like that. She said after that, she heard a gunshot and everything just went quiet. She said she looks out her window and she saw 2 black males. She said one black male and the other she can tell who he is. She said the suspects fled to an open garage next door. She said they were only there for a couple of seconds. After that, they came out down the driveway and entered a white car. She said the suspect car did not start. She said she saw him grabbing a tool to start the vehicle, and they took off and go through the west. How did the garage door get closed? A detective asked. That's $1 million question. We do not know how it got closed, another detective replied. Detectives knocked on the door of one of Sydney's neighbors. What do you know about this house next door? A detective asked. I do not know anything about it. I just know the neighbor. He is always outside fixing on his car, he replied. What does he normally drive? The detective asked again. He drives a blue Mustang, he replied. Have you seen any white cars there before? The detective asked again. No, he replied. Do you know the name of the guy that lives next to you? The detective asked again. "No, I don't," he replied. He said it's a young couple that lives there. The detective asked him if he knows the victim's name. He said he doesn't know him either. The detective asked if he has seen a neighbor associate with the victim before. He replied in the affirmative. The detective said he was going to leave his number with the neighbor. He told him to call him if he happens to hear something. The detectives think they might have to search the garage. They cannot search it immediately, though, because they need a warrant from a court of competent jurisdiction. 2 hours in, Sergeant Brandon Watkins speaks to Sydney's brother and sister-in-law who were away on vacation. They said they heard from a neighbor that Sydney was shot. Sergeant Brandon told them that Sydney was taken to St. John's Hospital after he was shot. But unfortunately, Sydney died. Sergeant Brandon asked them if they knew anybody that Sydney was having any kind of trouble with recently. They said they do not know anyone Sydney was having any kind of trouble with. Sergeant Brandon ended the call after thanking them for speaking to him. Sergeant Brandon told other officers that Sydney's brother and sister-in-law told him that Sydney was shot in his chair at that residence on the 15th of May last year. He said they made him know that it was 2 young guys that shot him then. They said he was shot in the back and stomach then. Another detective said their story has explained why Sydney had bracelets on his wrist. He said Sydney's brother said he couldn't let him stay in his house because he was throwing trash in the neighbors' yards, and he was aggressive with everybody. He said there was a lady who said yesterday, or the day before yesterday, the guy that was sitting in the chair out there started screaming at her. The guy told her to get out of his sight. While the team waited for a search warrant to search the victim's house and garage, a detective said someone just showed up at the house. He said they might be able to get a waiver. "Do you live here?" a detective asked him. "Yes, sir, I do," he replied. "Do you mind signing a waiver for us to search your garage?" a detective asked. "Yeah," he replied. As officers searched the garage, they began to see different ammunitions. They found 5 guns, including a 9mm Luger and a cock gun. The detectives believe they may have found the weapon used for the murder. The owner of the house swore that he does not know these ammunitions exist in his garage. A detective said he will send the ammunitions to ballistic for investigation. The detective asked him if his garage door was up. He said no. He said his garage door was not open. The detective asked again if there is any way they can get into his garage door. He said the back door doesn't lock. The detective told him that he has talked to a couple of his neighbors, and they said he has associated with the people next door. He said he is a mechanic, so he always works on their cars. The detective asked him about the guy that drives a white car and sits at the front that needed to jumpstart before he left there tonight. He said he doesn't know what white car the detective is talking about. "Listen, these cats were in your garage. They probably dumped the murder weapon off in your garage. I want you to think about this. Who have you seen over there? And what kind of activity have you seen over there?" the detective asked him. He said honestly, he did not see any activity over there. He said he doesn't associate with anybody. He asked for the detective's number so that he can call him when he sees any activity going on over there. Another detective suggested that Dylan be taken downtown. He said the detective should apply some type of pressure on him and see if he will stick with the story he told them initially. The detective said what the guy said made no sense to him, because if it was one gun they found stashed in his yard or under a trash can, it would have been understandable. But the numerous guns found in his yard suggest he still has a lot to say. The detective who had a chat with Dylan said his interaction with him suggests to him that he was believable. He said he has been wrong before. So, if the other detective suggests he should be taken downtown and interrogated more, then they should go ahead and do it. A detective went to the Dylan door again and knocked. Immediately he came out. The detective told him to put on his shirt, his shoes, and bring along his phone real quick. As soon as they arrived at homicide, Dylan was taken to the interrogation room for questioning. The detective said he appreciates his coming down to homicide. He said he knows it sucks. Dylan interjected quickly and told the detective that he can have his phone if that is what he wants. The detective asked him if he doesn't have any issues with him looking at his phone. He said he doesn't. He said the detective can go through his pictures and his contacts. Another detective came into the interrogation room during the interrogation. The detective that was talking to Dylan gave the detective Dylan's phone, and he told him that Dylan has permitted them to check his phone. He said he has permitted them to do whatever they want to do with his phone. The detective continued his interrogation while he gave the phone to the detective that joined him. He asked Dylan about the guns that were found in his garage. He said, "Is there any way that Dylan's fingerprint or DNA is going to be on those guns?" He said no. "How do you know that?" the detective asked again. He said he hasn't touched any of those guns, so there is no way his fingerprints will be on the guns. The detective asked him again if any of his neighbors have entered his garage before. "No," he replied. The detective asked Dylan if he received any phone call this evening from anybody that suggested the person was going to hide something or put something in his garage. He said no. The detective asked again if he hung out with any black guy at his house. He said not really. The detective said the reason he is asking is because of a picture he saw on his phone. The guy stood up to show him the picture. The picture showed he was with a guy in his garage. The detective asked if he knows the guy. He said yes. He said the guy in the picture is his buddy. He said his name is Skyler. The detective asked him when the picture was taken. Dylan said the picture was taken a couple of weeks ago. He helped the detective check the exact day the picture was taken. Dylan gave the detective Skyler's full name and says he helped him work on his truck. The detective asked Dylan if he was expecting anybody in his house this evening. "No, sir," he replied. The other detective who was checking Dylan's phone left the interrogation room. He left Dylan and the detective that was interrogating him from the start. Immediately the detective left. Dylan said he was expecting to go home and eat his damn tacos and go to bed. The detective said he was going to take Dylan's fingerprint, and that way he can compare it to any prints that are going to be on those guns. The detective asked Dylan if he doesn't have any issue with taking a DNA swab. Dylan said he doesn't care. The detective left the room and told Dylan that he will be right back. The detective that checked Dylan's phone said he was not feeling him. He said he feels if Dylan knows anything he would have told them. Detective Reggie asked the detective that interrogated Dylan if he mentioned a black male known as Skyler. The detective said he did. Detective Rogers said he blew that up. Detective Reggie himself made his way to the interrogation room to interrogate Dylan. Detective Reggie, "Hey, you look tired, man. Let me ask you something. Is Skyler your friend?" Dylan, yeah. Detective Reggie, you said he is a black male. Dylan, yeah. Detective Reggie, okay. Where does he live? Do you know? Dylan, out west. We go to school together. Detective Reggie, what school? Dylan, Central. Detective Reggie, how old is Skyler? Dylan, I'd say 27. Detective Reggie, okay. During the interrogation, Detective Mark Kennedy received a call from Dave. Dave went through Dylan's Facebook page and found the Skyler he was talking about. The information on Dylan's Facebook page shows that Dylan is a white male. Detective Mark shows Dylan the picture of the white male. "That's Skyler," Dylan said. Detective Mark, "That's not the guy in the picture that you identified as Skyler. That was an older, bald, black man." Detective Mark, "So, are you ready to tell the truth now?" Dylan, "Okay, that's the neighbor." Detective Mark, "Out by your garage?" Dylan, "Yes. He helped me push my truck out." Detective Mark, "Who is the neighbor?" Dylan, "His name is Reggie." Detective Mark, "Do you know Reggie's last name?" Dylan, "No. I don't." Detective Mark, "Which house does he live at?" Dylan, "I've seen him next door, next to me to the left." Detective Mark, "Like, the one that the murder happened?" Dylan, "Yes." Detective Mark, "Does he live over there?" Dylan, I don't know who lives there. Detective Mark, okay, but Reggie frequents that house next door. Dylan, yes sir. Detective Mark, why didn't you tell us that? Dylan, because he is in the picture and I didn't want you guys to think that I was hiding anything. Detective Mark, but you are. Detective Reggie, we know you are scared to death right now. Dylan, oh, I am scared to death right now. Detective Reggie, we know. Dylan, you guys see this right now. Detective Reggie, we know that. Detective Reggie, all my partner is trying to do is to get out why they did what they did. He is trying to solve a murder, bro. Somebody lost their life today. Dylan, I know buddy. I want somebody to find out who shot them. Detective Reggie, but if you mean that, you are going to start being truthful to us, because talking to you is like pulling teeth. Detective Mark, you are making it worse for yourself. Leave the fear out of this. Stop the fear. Dylan, okay. So, I was not at work today. I was inside for about 95% of the day. I decided to go outside and roll a blunt. I opened my garage door. I heard, boom. It was a bang. I stopped rolling the blunt. Reggie came over and threw the guns. He threw the gun underneath the toolbox. I saw Reggie and a black guy. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I want to hide them." Sidney just shot himself. I said, "Dude, I am getting out of here." He ran out. I locked the doors. I got in my car and I left. Detective Mark, what did the other guy look like? Dylan, he was a black guy. He is tall, skinny, black skin. Detective Mark, what you just said now at 1:52 in the morning is a whole lot more than what you have said at all. Hope you know what I mean. Dylan, all right. I apologize, guys. I'm just scared. Detective Mark, well, you should be scared. You made me look like a fool because I believed in you. Dylan, give me a minute. Detective Mark, sit tight. Detective Mark came out of the interrogation room after he chatted with Dylan. He narrated what happened in the interrogation room to other detectives. Dylan identified Reggie. He stated that Reggie said Sidney had shot himself. He said that is unlikely based on the fact that there was a loud argument that was going on before the incident happened. The team searches for Reggie on Dylan's Facebook page. Here it is the detective who searched said. He found a picture that looks like the guy in the photo from Dylan's phone. He found Reginald's last name. His last name is Sutton. 54 years old Reginald Sutton has multiple felony convictions including burglary, drug possession, and shooting with intent to kill. Detective Mark went back to the interrogation room, where Dylan has been held. Detective Mark, who is this? Dylan, that's Reggie. Detective Mark, you are saying that's him. That's Reggie. Dylan, yeah. Detective Mark, are you sure? Dylan, yeah. Detective Mark left the interrogation room and returned to his team members. He said Dylan identified the guy in the picture as Reggie. He said that means they have a lead. Yeah, that means we have to find him. And that car is still running around somewhere. Another detective said. Then, the team gets body cam footage from first responders to the shooting. While the team was watching the video, they saw an officer walking down from the crime scene. They also saw a white Monte Carlo that has broken down in the video. The car broke down while trying to leave the house. A detective said that car is probably the suspect's vehicle. The video showed where the officer was asking a young man if the car belongs to him. The young man said the car is his cousin's car. The young man said he was going to get gas. The officer asked how long has the car broken down. The young man said it broke down 30 minutes ago. The officer asked if he heard or seen something around where his car broke down. The young man said he did not see or hear anything. The officer told him someone has been shot around the place that his car broke down. The detectives who watched the video are convinced that the guy in the video does not look like Reginald. They said probably the young man is the second guy they are looking for. The detectives are convinced that the car in the video is the car they are looking for. Detectives said all officers should be on the lookout for the white car. 17 hours in, Detective White gets the autopsy report. White said the autopsy reveals that it was as if someone was coming from the back and putting it up against his head and pulling the trigger. He said he was going to take what he has to the district attorney's office, and he will see if they can get a warrant for the arrest of Reggie. Detective Watkins gets a call from Sydney's family. She said they are sure that Reggie has something to do with the death of the victim. They said that Reggie is part of their family. Reggie and Sydney are first cousins. He said the family is saying that Reggie is hiding somewhere in the out east. After some minutes, Detective White got a phone call from the district attorney's office. He said they have been able to secure an arrest warrant for Reggie. With an arrest warrant in hand, the team hits out the east of Tulsa searching for Reggie Sutton and the white Monte Carlo. The team hits all the streets in the east, but there was no luck. After hours of searching, Reggie turns himself in. Reggie was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Detective White, I know you are going through a lot right now. Reggie interjected. Well, Mr. White, the first thing I had to do was to turn myself in and do the right thing. Detective White, that is a good decision. I appreciate that because that shows me a lot. Detective White, tell me about what happened last night. Reggie, okay, it was my cousin, Sidney Ray. I was over at the house. Sidney Ray does crack and he gets on it and starts fighting people, chucking bricks at people, cursing people. He's kind of crazy, you know. So, I said this is my first cousin. First of all, Mr. White, let me let you know, his mother and I are sisters. He started yelling and woofing, and that's how he does. So, I say, chill my cousin. You can be doing people like this. You yell at everybody that comes into this yard. After some few minutes, he pulled a 9mm out. I said, I'm your cousin, man. Are you going to do that to me? So he sat back down and sat in the brown chair he was in. So he started doing it again. That was when I walked up to him. So he took a knife and hit me on my belly. So he took the gun out. I said, are you going to do that to me like that, man? So we started dragging it. It went off. Detective White interjected. Reggie, it went off, sir. Detective White, you know I have interviewed a lot of people out there last night. Some of the people I interviewed lived in that area, and they said it was not only you that was up there. They said there was another male that you were with. I am interested in knowing who he is. Who were you with? Detective White asked again. Reggie, Terry Ratliff. Detective White, I need to find Terry because he could corroborate your story. Do you know his number? Reggie, I don't have a phone. I do not know it by heart. Detective White, is he the one? Did he leave in the car? I mean the white Monte Carlo. Reggie, yes. Detective White, where is the car right now? Reggie, it should be at his mother's house. Reggie gives the location of Terry's mother's house. Reggie, I'm letting them know about the car. A few minutes later, a detective said Detective Warren has found the car. He said when they went and knocked on the door to get permission to tow it off the property, a guy answered. The guy that answered was Terry. Terry agreed to talk and he was brought to homicide. When Terry got to homicide, he was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Detective White and Detective Kansas Corps entered the interrogation room. Detective White, just tell me the truth, that's it. Terry, I'm fixing to tell you. Terry continued. He said Sidney was right there. He said when Sidney smokes some dope, he usually gets irritated and starts talking a little noise about people. He said Sidney got up in Reggie's face at one point in time, and Reggie also got up in his. He said before he knew it, Sidney was sitting down, and Reggie was all over him. He said Reggie was getting ready to whoop Sidney. He said Sidney scratched him a little bit. He said Reggie came to him and showed him a scar on his stomach. He said that was when Reggie told him to hand the gun over to him. He said he didn't want to give Reggie the gun but Reggie intimidated him. He said he handed the gun to Reggie. The next thing he knew was Reggie shot Sydney in the head. Detective White: okay, that's it. Terry: he murdered that dude. Detective White: that's the part I need to know exactly clear about. So how did he do it? Where was he standing when he did it? Detective White asked again. Terry: right over him. He grabbed the gun, went back over to Sydney, and stood over him. He backed him back. Sydney was still talking then. Detective White: what was he saying? Terry: he was saying, shoot me, shoot me. Terry said the next thing he heard was a gunshot. Detective White: where did he shoot him? Terry: it was on the right side of the head, I guess. That's all I know. Detective: Sydney wasn't fighting him or doing anything. Terry: Sydney was a good guy. He didn't deserve to die. Terry said, after that, Reggie said he better not say anything to anyone. He says Reggie told him to hide the gun in Dylan's garage. He said he grabbed the gun. He said he took it up and pits it up under the tool chest. Detective White: when you reached under there to get rid of that gun, did you see any other guns? Terry: I didn't notice any. Detective White: where did you go from there? Terry: I tried to leave but the car didn't start. He hopped in the car with me. He said Reggie said they needed to get away before someone calls the police. He said Reggie said he should stay. Reggie shot himself if anyone asked. Terry said he told him they were going to detect that he didn't shoot himself. He said they ran back to Dylan's house and Dylan drove them to a gas station to fill up a gas can. He said when they came back, they dropped him off the car. He said he saw the police walking towards the car shining a light on it. He said the police asked if the car belongs to him. He said he told them they went out to fill the car because it ran out of gas. He said he got the car started and he immediately went to his mother's house. He said he stayed right there till morning. Detective White: I'll be right back. You can hang here real quickly. Detective White returned to the interrogation room, where Reggie was being held. Detective White: well, the version that we got from your friend over there was a little bit different from yours. Reggie: how far was I off? Detective White: quite a bit. Detective White: here is what I think happened based on the version that he told me. I do not doubt that Sydney has got some issues. I think we can agree on that. Reggie: yeah, we can. Detective White: I've heard about how he is kind of so forth, and I think he was probably running his mouth to you and being disrespectful. Reggie interjected. He showed the scar on his stomach to Detective White. He said that was when Sydney stabbed him. Detective White: that was what pissed you off. Reggie: pissed the out of me. Detective White: then you decided to handle it, and it went too far. Reggie: yeah. So, what will I be charged with, Mr. White? It could be no self-defense for what he did to me, could it? Detective White: no, I don't think so. I think that it raises it to another level. Reggie: I understand. Less than 24 hours after Sydney was murdered, Detective White solves his case. Reginald Sutton subsequently pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years. Ballistics testing confirmed that a 9mm pistol in Dylan's garage was the murder weapon. None of the other guns found in the garage were determined to be involved in the murder. Dylan later admitted to helping Reggie and Terry flee the scene. Dylan and Terry were not charged in connection with the case. 9 months later, Sydney's family remembers him. 12:27 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. 911 operators received a call from an unknown caller. 911 operator: do you need police, fire, or medical? Caller: somebody just got shot. 911 operator: where's the person that shot him? Caller: I don't know. I was driving and I just heard the shot and I heard him scream. And I looked and I saw him lying there. He's lying on the ground and there's blood everywhere. He's naked. 911 operator: okay, let me get you connected with the MSA. Detectives immediately rushed to the scene of the incident. They met a dead body lying on the ground just as the caller said. 53 years old Michael Binder was born in Chicago and raised in Hawaii. He moved to Tulsa 17 years ago, living for a time with his mother and stepfather. Michael struggled with drug addiction for many years, but he was active in his church and was trying to turn his life around. Michael was struck once in the side of his head. Patrol transported a neighbor and the apartment leasing agent who called 911. While detectives Reggie Warren and Max Ryden continued working on the scene, two other detectives decided to go downtown to conduct interviews. From there, they will go ahead and start digging into the victim's past. Maybe they might get lucky with some information. An hour later, Detective Max Ryden gets a lead after answering a call to the victim's phone. Michael's friend Stuart said Michael planned to meet a woman earlier in the day. Detective Mark told other team members that Detective Max has been answering the victim's phone as it's been ringing. He told them there was someone that called that he's going to meet with that has some information. He said they were going to just get through those witnesses. While Detective White gets started with Michael's neighbor, Detective Leatherman interviews the leasing agent. Detective Ronnie, my name is Ronnie. I'm a detective here. I'll just ask you to tell whatever story you have and we'll go from there. Mike's neighbor, I was in my car and I heard someone screaming help, and then I heard something that sounded like a pop. Then I saw two people running. Detective Ronnie, were they running from the apartment where the shooting happened? Mike's neighbor, yeah. I saw them just driving by. Then I saw his body, so I parked my car and got out to see if he is okay because I knew who he was. Detective Ronnie, okay. Mike's neighbor, I saw his body there and I didn't know how to react. Detective Ronnie, can you describe the people you saw running as best as you can? Mike's neighbor, honestly, I saw just two white people. One of them had blonde hair. It may be down or up. It was kind of long, so it was a female. Mike's neighbor, yeah. The other guy is a white man, I think. I didn't see their faces. Detective Ronnie, have you noticed them out there before? Mike's neighbor, no. Detective Ronnie, have you had any struggles with him? Mike's neighbor, no, not with him. He is really quiet. I remember he was just trying to get his life together. I know he had a past with drugs because I did his background check, but he was not violent. He was all about peace. Next door, Detective Mark is ready to interrogate another neighbor of Mike. She said she parked outside his apartment moments before the shooting. Detective Mark, all right, so just tell me what happened. Mike's neighbor, I saw a guy and a woman going towards that apartment. They knocked and they went in. About 30 seconds later, I heard the guy yelling for help. After that, the gun went off. After that, they ran off. Detective Mark, were they white or black? Mike's neighbor, both are white. The male has a beard and short hair. The female has blonde hair. Detective Mark, okay. Mike's neighbor, both of them were very skinny. Detective, maybe they used drugs, kind of skinny. Mike's neighbor, yeah. Detective Ryden returns from speaking with Michael's friend. Detective Ronnie came out of the interrogation room to address other officers. He said both witnesses described the suspects as a white male and a female with blonde hair. He said other than that they couldn't give any additional identifiers. Detective Ryden returns from speaking with Michael's friend. He said the victim was in some program where he gets help getting an apartment and a job and stuffs like that. He said the guy he just talked to known as Stuart said he's back into selling meth. He said it looks like he would have lots of girls over there doing drugs. He said Stuart was with him all night. He said a little after 4 a.m., he went to his house, and he said while he was there, he was going to re-up with his plug. Michael gave Stuart the name of the woman that supplied him with drugs. He said he was supposed to re-up for 4 to 5 ounces. Michael told Stuart that he was afraid of her. He said he left around 5:30 a.m., and the plug had still not gotten there. The detective said they need to have access to Michael's phone. Michael's phone received several Facebook message alerts. Unfortunately, there is a lock pattern on Michael's phone. The team hopes to find out if Michael was in contact with his supplier. Detective White has to wait to get Michael's phone records and Facebook Messenger history because of the lock pattern on Michael's phone. Detective Ryden notified Michael's mother and stepfather. His parents said he is the most non-violent person you will ever meet. They said he will rather give someone his money than fight over it. His parents have lost 2 sons in the last 2 years over drug issues. Detective Mark, hey, what did you find out? Tell me you have some videos. Detective Reggie, no. The apartment complex building has one surveillance camera that doesn't work. The detectives were shocked that the camera could not capture anything in broad daylight. Detective Mark said he will revisit the area. Maybe some witnesses may come up and start talking to him. 20 hours in, a detective said he will make a flyer that he will rake to the complex. He said some of the people over there might have a camera in their residence, and he will like to have a bunch of it to be able to hand out with his phone number on it. And he will also be able to put the word out that they are looking for some information. Another detective said they should take the victim's phone along so that if anybody calls, they will have his contact right away. Detective White drove back to the scene of the incident to see if he could find some witnesses he could talk to. As soon as he alighted from his car, he saw a young man walking and he approached him. Detective White, I'm working on this homicide that happened yesterday. Witness, I heard the shot. Detective White, did you see anybody run after you heard the shot? Witness, no sir, I did not. Detective White, I'm going to give you this flyer. My number is there. If you hear anything, let me know. While surveying the crime scene, Detective Mark saw an apartment that has a camera. He immediately rushed down to the apartment. Detective Mark, hey there, I noticed you have a camera. House owner, I do. And unfortunately, my internet was shut off. Detective White, okay well, disappointing. But thank you. While Detective White entered his car and he was about to move, a call came through the deceased phone. Detective White, my name is Detective White. I noticed that you've been calling Mike's phone. Had you heard what happened to Mike? Caller, I heard the news this morning and I was afraid it might be him. Detective White, yeah, it's him. How well do you know him? Caller, I was homeless at one time and I stayed with him for a while. Detective White, where are you at now? Maybe I can holler at you and you might be able to help me out. Caller, I was headed over to his place to see if he was there. Detective White, I'll be right across his apartment. Okay. After some few minutes, the caller arrived and Detective White allowed her into his car. Detective White, I am sorry you are going through this. Caller, he was a good person. Detective White, honestly, I have not heard from one person that he was a bad guy. What has he been up to? Caller, I don't know. I know he has talked about how he has been ripped off a couple of times. Detective White, okay. Did he tell you how long ago he got robbed? Caller, probably a month ago. Detective White, did he give you any of the details? Caller, he said a woman ripped him off. Detective White, do you know who she is? Caller, no, I do not. Detective White, I know he was selling meth, but do you know who he was supplied by? Caller, no, I don't. I want to know who did this. Detective White, I do too, and he's got some nice parents that are devastated. As the first 48 hours wind down, Detective White updates Mike's father. He told him he hoped was that people would have started calling him, but that has not happened yet. He said they were not going to stop and they will continue to work with everything they have. Mike's father said that sounds great and he appreciates the efforts of the detectives. In the first 48 hours, Tulsa homicide responded to the shooting death of 53-year-old Michael Binder. They learned that a white and a blonde woman were seen fleeing his apartment. They also heard that Michael may have returned to selling drugs and planned to meet a supplier on the day he was murdered. They got a warrant to search Michael's phone and Facebook page. They have searched for witnesses at Michael's apartment complex, but have come up empty. The next day, someone called Detective White's phone and left a message. Detective White played the voice note for Detective Ronnie so. The caller said he wanted to remain anonymous, but he has some information about the shooting in Tulsa. He said he knows the girl and she told him what happened in detail last night. He left a phone number that Detective White can use to get to them. Let me try to call it, Detective White told Detective Ronnie. Detective White called him and he agreed to meet with him. Detective White and Detective Ronnie headed to the meeting point where they agreed to meet with the tipster. The tipster said Michael's supplier is staying at a nearby motel. 4 days after Michael's murder, the warrants team sets up surveillance on the supplier's motel room. A few minutes later, a car drove to the door of the supplier. A white male with a gray t-shirt came down from the car and knocked on the door of the room. He was let in by someone who the detectives were not able to identify then. A few minutes later, the white guy came out of the room with a female loading the stuff off. They both entered the vehicle and started driving. The detectives tracked down their car and arrested them. They and the detectives headed back to homicide. Immediately they arrived at the homicide. Both of them were taken into a separate room for questioning. Detective White and Detective Zanoni entered the investigation room where the white female was being held. "Hello, my name is Detective Jason White and this is Detective Zanoni over here," he said. "I'm working on a murder. That's what we do." He said they know sometimes in these investigations, people do stupid things. Female suspect: "Yeah, I see where you are going with your investigation. I was in his house. When I left him, he was completely fine." Detective White: "Let's stop. Whose apartment did you go to?" Female suspect: "Mike." Detective White: "The day he got murdered." Female suspect: "Yeah, that day." Detective White: "What time were you over there?" Female suspect: "It was 7:50 a.m." Detective White: "Did you ever go back in that apartment that day?" Female suspect: "No, not at all." Detective White: "You went over there with whom?" Female suspect: "With a man and another woman." Detective White: "Why did you go over there?" Female suspect: "He wanted me to come over there and see him." Detective White: "For what?" Female suspect: "Just go and visit him." Detective White: "Here is the decision that you have to make. Either you want to go down the road of I want to savage my life and I want to have a life, or you want to go down with somebody else potentially for the rest of your life." He said he doesn't think they had any issues other than he was a little bit behind on his. She interjected by saying he didn't owe her any money. She said he didn't owe her a single dime. Detective White told her she will go to jail for murder. She interjected in a sober mood saying she had no idea who killed the victim. Detective White asked her where she was. She said after she left Michael's apartment, she and her friends spent the afternoon at a flea market. Detective White: "If anybody tells me that you were going to confess you were there, then that is a flat-out lie." Female suspect: "Absolutely, it is a lie." Detective White: "Do you have any objections to us looking at your phone?" Female suspect: "Yeah, you can look." Detective White: "All right. Sit tight and be patient." Detectives started going through her phone. They found a text between her and the friend she said she met up with around the time Michael was murdered. The text corroborates her alibi. Detectives discovered the information they got from the tipster was not correct. They know it's frustrating, but they had no other option than to release the two suspects. 2 weeks later, Michael's Facebook Messenger records finally came in. Detectives found a series of messages between him and his female. The name of the female is Lena Rocher. The messages were sent before the homicide happened. The conversations were like hanging out. There was somewhere in the conversation where the victim told his female friend that he was going to give her 2 zips if she makes it to his apartment within an hour. Detective Mike asked Detective Ronnie what a zip means after he read that part of the message. Detective Ronnie told him a zip means an ounce. Lena arrived at Michael's complex 30 minutes before his murder. Detectives were able to get her picture and her location through the Facebook Messenger chat. They got to know that she is a blonde-haired lady who lives in Sapulpa. Detective White immediately called the Sapulpa PD for a background check on Lena. The Sapulpa PD told detectives that she has some stuff on her. He said she had no prior felony convictions, but she is a person of interest in a missing firearm investigation. The Sapulpa PD told Tulsa detectives that Lena could be wrapped up tonight if they want it done. Tulsa detectives told him that will be great. Detective White told them he will be more than happy to come to them. An hour later, Sapulpa PD brings in Lena. Detective White and Detective Ronnie made their way to the Sapulpa police station to try and talk to Lena and see what she has to say. Detective White and Detective Ronnie made their way to the interrogation room as soon as they arrived at the police station. Detective White: "Hello, young lady. I do not know the reason why they brought you here, but I wanted to talk to you about something else. Do you know how to read and write?" Lena: "Yes." Detective White: "And you read what is on my shirt and it says homicide?" Lena: "Yes." Detective White: "Do you have any idea why I want to speak with you?" Lena: "Yeah, honestly, yeah." Michael Binder. Detective White: "Yep. Lena, he was my friend. I helped him once. They wanted me to go over there so they can just take his grocery home." Detective White: "Okay, who are they?" Lena: "Nicholas Gibson and Ruthie Blair." Detective White: "How do you these guys?" Lena: "Through Samuel Washington." Detective White: "How did you guys end up over there?" Lena, honestly, I was supposed to be getting in some stuff. Meth. And they wanted to try to take his stuff from him. Detective White, tell me what went down when you got to the apartments. Lena, I knocked on the door and he let me in. And then I went in the bathroom, which is where I was when they came in. Detective White, did you intentionally leave the door open or unlocked? Lena, yeah, I left the door unlocked. Detective White, okay, knowing that they were going to come behind you. Lena, yes. Detective White, did they come inside the apartment on their own? Lena, yeah. I came out because I heard all the noise and they told me to get on the fucking floor. Those were their exact words. He got up and took off running. He went to the door and started shouting for help. I heard a bang. Detective Ronnie, who's the one that pulled the trigger? Lena, Nicholas Gibson. Detective White, and then, what did you guys do? Lena, fled. She said they fled in a car that she parked nearby. Detective White, what is the discussion in the car after you left? Lena, I'm just told that if I throw them under the bus, basically the same thing will happen to me. Detective White, let me go through this again. Just correct me if I am wrong. You went inside by yourself. How was he dressed? Liana, he was fully dressed. And then, I went in the bathroom, which is where I was when they came in, and he had got down into a towel, I guess. Detective White, was there anything that was supposed to go on? Lena, oh yeah. He talked about trying to have sex with me and stuff. Detective Ronnie, why did you want to take his stuff, and how did you know about him? Lena, because they had me get them stuff before. Detective White, from him. Lena, yeah. She claims Nicholas and Ruth had her get drugs for Michael in the past. Detective White, are there phone numbers in your phone? Lena, possibly. Nicholas's number should be in there for sure. Detective White, all right, give me a few minutes. Detective White and Detective Ronnie left the interrogation room. Detective Ronnie said Lena will be charged with felony murder. He said that we'll start working towards getting an arrest warrant for both of her accomplices. Both Nicholas and Ruth have prior convictions for burglary. Detective White said their efforts would now be to find both Nicholas and Ruth and bring them in safely. 4 days later, Detective White gets a lead. He got a tip about Samuel Washington's investigation. The tipster stated that Michael and Lena have had some sort of relationship. White said the way he is hearing it is that he potentially directed Lena to do the robbery. An hour later, Detective White brought Lena back to homicide. Detective White, you already went out on a limb and told me everything as far. Liana, yeah. Detective White, I'll just get to the parts that I'm wanting to shore up. Who did you tell about this situation? Lena, my mom, of course. Detective White, anybody else? Lena, that's the only other person I mentioned it or talked to about it. Detective White, did you make a phone call right after this happened or talk to anybody? Lena, I had somebody call me. Detective White, who? Lena, Samuel Washington. Detective White, this guy right, while showing her his picture. I am not going to waste anybody's time here. Do you have a relationship with him? Lena, he was my boyfriend. Detective White, so that is what I am getting at. I do not want you to sit there and protect that guy. Liana, no, I am not trying to protect anybody. He has told me to do things that I... Detective White, okay, let's get into that. Tell me exactly what he told you to do. Liana, to do whatever it takes to get the money to bond him out. Lena claims Samuel wanted her help to get out of jail. So, he hatched a plan. He planned that Liana would rob Mike. He wanted her to set it up for Nick and Ruthie to go do it. Okay, give me a quick minute, Detective White said while he and Detective Ronnie left the interrogation room. He asked Detective Ronnie what he found. Detective Ronnie said he is looking at murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. Detectives decided to have Samuel transported from jail for questioning. Later that day, Samuel was brought to homicide. He was taken into an interrogation room for questioning. Detective White, first of all, my name is Jason White. I am a homicide detective. You had said something that you want to clear your conscience when we were in the car coming down here. Isn't that right, Samuel? Yeah. Detective White, what do you want to clear your conscience about? Samuel, I talked to Annie. Detective White, you referred to her as Annie when we are talking about Lena. Samuel, when I was in jail, I called her and she answered the phone. Her first words were everything went bad. And she said, he's gone. I said, who's gone? And she said money or Mike or something. This guy Mike, if I remember, She knew him from the past, and she admits she wants me for about getting him. Detective White, what does that mean? Samuel, rob him. That was way before I was even in jail. I told her Ruthie and Nick usually do stuff like that. Detective White, so you guys have had some discussions about possibly the robbery before you were arrested. You ended up getting incarcerated. Were there any other calls that made or any discussion between the two of you or her about wanting to rob him? Samuel, it was pretty much. If she still wanted to do that with Nick, he could help her. He said after they got locked up, he told Lena to work with Nick on a plan targeting Michael. Detective White, okay, meaning the robbery. Samuel, yeah, robbery. I didn't know anything about any murder. Detective White, you may be in a little bit of trouble. If you hadn't mentioned something to her about that situation, that guy would be alive, you know. Samuel, if I get charged, what would I be charged with? Detective White, it will be with murder. Probably a felony murder. Based on the kind of putting the wheels in motion, and then somebody dying in the midst of that, it becomes felony murder. Do you see what I am saying? Samuel, yeah, okay. Detective White, I will holler at you in a quick minute. 2 months after Michael's murder, detectives got a call in the morning that Missouri authorities were able to get Ruth Blair into custody. A tipster called and said both of them were at a house that was nearby. Officers went there really quickly and they managed to capture her, but they didn't find him. Detective White and Detective Ronnie went to Missouri to question here. Detective White, hey there, young lady. Ruth, hi. Detective White, are you doing all right? Ruth, yes. I was scary. Detective White, yes, I know, and you know what? This is a scary situation. But you have to tell me what's up. I already know what's up, but I need to hear from you. Ruth, all I know is Leanne has been texting and calling my old man for a week or two. She had this master plan to go over there because he was supposed to have a lot of money. And Nick asked for a rundown. Like, what's the deal? She said she will go and then the rest can come in. She said to pull into the actual complex. Lena went in by herself and she left the door unlocked. Ruth said she was behind Nick. Nick went in first and he opened the door and she shut the door. Detective White, what was said at this point? Ruth, he said put your hands up. So the dude jumps out and he got a sheet wrapped around him. He walks right in front of Nick and it all happened so fast. Before you knew it, he's got his hand on the doorknob. Nick said don't do it, don't do it. So the dude swings the door open and run out and yelled for help. And then Nick went to pistol whip him. He just wanted to hit him with it. When he went to him the first time, his finger slipped, and the gun went off. Detective White, what did the three of you do next? Ruth, he and I ran out. Went and got in the Jeep. It took her a little longer to come out because she was rounding off everything she could find. She said Lena grabbed drugs from Michael's apartment before fleeing. She said Lena and her didn't get the wallet and the wallet was the goal. Detective White, did you ever see her again? Ruth, no. Detective White, did Nick? Ruth, no. She said she and Nick went their separate ways. She said she was so afraid she was not going to see him again. The next day, Detective White gets an update from Springfield PD. They finally located Nicholas Gibson. Nicholas Gibson was charged with felony murder in the first degree, and he is awaiting trial. Ruth Blair was charged with felony murder in the first degree, and she is awaiting trial. Lena Rocher was charged with felony murder in the first degree, and she is awaiting trial. Samuel Washington was charged with felony murder in the first degree, and he is awaiting trial. Criminal charges are often dropped or reduced, and the suspects are presumed innocent until proven guilty. 3:03 a.m. in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a security guard calls 911. The 911 operator asked if the caller needs police, fire, or medical assistance. The caller replied by saying he needs the assistance of the police. The caller said his lead is out there right now. He said he just found a body out in the parking lot. When patrol arrived, they found a woman's dead body wrapped in a blanket. The team hopes to identify the victim through her fingerprint. While the investigation was being carried out on the crime scene, Detective Reggie discovered a camera in a house close to the crime scene that could give them a lead. He and the other detective decided to visit the house to see if they could get footage. After collecting the footage, they headed back to homicide for investigation. While watching the video footage, they discovered that 14 minutes before the security guard called 911, a white car parked where the victim was dumped. Just outside Mobile in Alabama, policemen got a report of a man shot outside his house. A caller who called 911 said the victim was shot in the yard. He said it was life-threatening. Before policemen arrived at the scene, family members rushed the victim to the hospital. The victim was taken to Health University Hospital. 37 years old Joe Dickerson, a car enthusiast who wished to take over his father's garage, is the victim. He was survived by 9 children. Joe was shot once in the abdomen. When mobile detectives arrived at the scene, a witness came forward. The witness agreed to talk when he gets to homicide. The team left the scene of the crime for further investigation at homicide. As soon as they got to homicide, the witness was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Detective Barnes entered the investigation room to question the witness. Detective Barnes told the witness to tell him what happened. The witness said he has only agreed to talk because the victim is his cousin and he has a lot of children like him. The witness said he wasn't in the yard when the shooting happened. He said he was at the corner store coming down the street. He said he popped up into the house moments after the shooting. He said he saw the shooter running with a gun in his hand coming down the street. Detective Barnes asked the victim if he knows the shooter. The witness said he knows him very well. He said his name is Melvin Fox. He said the shooter is popularly called Little D, and he just got out of prison. The witness said he can confirm that Melvin Fox is the shooter because he saw a gun in his hand. He said he saw him clearly because it was daylight. Detective Barnes asked the witness the type of gun he saw in the hand of the shooter. He said it wasn't a Clint Eastwood gun. Detective Barnes asked if there was anyone in the house at the time of the shooting, but the witness said he does not know. The witness said the victim had told him that he and Melvin Fox got into an argument. He gave detectives the name of another cousin who saw the victim and Melvin arguing. The detectives asked him when that was. He said it was 20 to 30 minutes before he showed up. The detectives asked if he knows what led to their argument. He said Melvin was mad because the victim was doing better than him. Detective Barnes asked who owns the house where the victim was shot. The witness said the house belonged to their grandmother. He said everybody stays there when they have nowhere to go. He said there were a couple of people he thinks were there at the time of the shooting, but they don't want to talk to the detectives. He said he will try and make them talk. Lead Detective Jermaine Rogers arrives after speaking with other family members at the hospital. When Rogers looks for Fox in the database, he finds that Fox is 34 years old. The team heads out to look for the cousin who witnessed the argument. 13 hours in, detectives track down the cousin at a store near the crime scene. He was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Immediately, Detective Jermaine entered the investigation room. He asked him to talk about what he knows about the shooting. He said Little D was running his mouth. He said a few moments later, he heard someone calling his name. Detective Jermaine asked him where Little D was standing when he called his name. He said Little D was standing by the yard. Detective Rogers asked him what they were arguing about. He said they were arguing about a couple of dollars. He said Little D was saying his name like everybody that owes me will pay me what they owe me. He said he was just sitting somewhere. He said he left him and turned to the victim. Detective Jermaine asked what he was saying to Joe. He said he was telling Joe that he was going to kill him. He said he felt like he just doesn't like Joe because Joe did not owe him money. He said while Little D was arguing with Joe, he told him he was going to the 8th Street and he will be back. He said he probably went to get a pistol. The witness said he went to a store to get a soda. Little D had already dipped off before he came back. He said it was when he was coming out of the store that he heard a couple of shots. He said it was like pow. Then he heard pow, pow. He said as soon as he heard the shot, he knew something had happened to Joe. He said he knew he premeditated and did it because that was what he always wanted to do. Detective Jermaine asked the witness if he witnesses the shooting, and the witness said he did not. Detective Jermaine asked the witness if there was someone in the apartment before the shooting took place. He said his little brother was there. In the murder of an unidentified woman, detectives hope security camera caught the killer leaving her body in a hospital parking lot. The security camera pans away before the suspect got out. Detective Reggie and other detectives watch the video together to see if they can get the suspect or at least get a lead. Detective Reggie said 2 seconds earlier, they have gotten a tag. Detective Reggie moved to another camera, but he discovered that the camera did not pen. Detectives looked up for the car and discovered that it was either Toyota or Honda Accord. A few hours later, a detective said he went to the autopsy when they were able to clean her body up. He said shots were all around the victim's body. He said it looks like the victim was just from a very close distance. He said the bullet that killed her was the one that hit her jugular. A few moments later, a detective said he has just received an email from the lab guy. The crime lab got a match on the victim's fingerprint. Her name is Marissa Dowie's. Maris Dowie's is a 49-year-old woman who was born in Tulsa. She leaves behind 3 children. The detective that received the email from the lab guy searched for Marissa Dowie's in the database. He got a name of a guy who had domestic issues with the victim. His name is Lil Roach. He got a 2015 report which revealed that Lily Roach came to the door of the victim and even tried to break the victim's window. He pulled her by her hair. He dragged her and began to choke her. The charges were dropped against him because Marissa did not appear in court. Lil Roach's previous convictions include ferocity and drug convictions. After they finished searching, the detectives agreed that he is someone they needed to talk to. They also discovered in the course of searching the database that the victim had a son before she died. Detectives found an address for the son's employer. After some few minutes, the detectives headed up to find the son and the guy that had domestic issues with the victim in the past. Their first point of call is the address of the son's employer. The detectives arrived at the address in a few minutes and met the victim's son there. There is no easy way to say this, but your mom has been killed, a detective said to the son of the victim. The detective told him that his mother was shot this morning. The detective asked the young boy if his mother was dating or married to someone. The young boy said his mother is still married to his stepdad, but he knows they've had problems for years. The detectives asked the young boy the name of his stepdad, and he said his name was Eli Roach. The detectives asked the young boy where Eli was living presently. He told them Eli was living in his grandpa's old house. The detectives appreciated the young boy and left after he gave them the address of his grandpa's old house where he claimed Lil was leaving. The detectives immediately moved to the address to see what they could find. When they got there, they found out that it was a lonely place that seems like nobody was staying there. But they found bloodstains on some objects in the building which prompted the officers to approach a court for a search warrant so that they can search the entire building. The detectives returned to the building after they got a search warrant. This time they entered without hesitation. In the living room, detectives found blood, a single 3D showcasing, and a pillowcase that had the same wrapping as the one the victim was wrapped in when she was shot. After some few minutes, a woman approached the detectives and said she used to date Roach. Detective, how long have you been dating Roach? She said she has been dating him for a year. Detective, what kind of car does he have? My car, a white Acura, she replied. The detective pulls up the video of the car seen in the surveillance video and asked her if that was her car. She replied in the affirmative. The detective asked how she would find Roach if she was to find him. He told her to think of some of the places Roach could be at that particular time. She told the detective that she does not know much of Roach's movement. She told them there was no way she could figure out where he would be at that particular moment. Last night on the phone, the family gave detectives an address of where to find the victim's close friend. It was reported that she was the last person that the victim was seen hanging out with. When detectives arrived at the apartment, they knocked and a woman answered. Detective, I am working on Mary's case and I know she was here the other night. Yes, she replied. She said it was the night before the last, and she left her apartment about 1:15 until 2 a.m. Back to the investigation of Joe Dickerson, detectives identified a possible suspect known as Ernesto Little D, who is Joe's cousin. Now, they need to find an eyewitness who was present at the scene. Joe's cousin, who has been speaking with detectives, told them they would probably get more information from his brother. Detectives asked him where they could find his brother. He said his brother would still be in the yard by the time detectives get back there. He said his brother might be hanging out in the family house while the shooting happened. Detectives left homicide and made their way back to the crime scene to see if they could meet the guy that might probably be there while the shooting happened. As detectives arrived, they found a possible eyewitness and he agreed to talk at homicide. He entered the car with the detectives and they all headed back to homicide. As soon as they arrive at homicide, the witness was taken to an investigation room for question. "You know what we are here for?" a detective asked. "Yeah, for the murder of my cousin," he replied. "I know it's going to be odd to talk about, but Joe needs your help to talk about what happened," the detective told him when he noticed he was still reluctant to talk. He started his speech with the word. Little D did not really like Joe. He said nobody ever figured out why. He said Little D had been drinking that morning, and he was loud all day. He said Little D just started talking out of nowhere and kept talking about how people owed him money. He said a few moments after, Little D started arguing with his brother. He said Little D was ready to fight him. He said his brother was also confronting Little D a little bit. He said Little D calmed down a little bit after he confronted him. He said after that Little D started threatening Joe. He said Little D told Joe that he was going to gun him down if he finds him here when he gets back. He said Little D left and disappeared for a little while and that was when he got access to a gun. He said he and his uncle was standing in the yard. He said his instincts just told him to stand there. He said he doesn't know why, but out of nowhere, the front door was sprung open, and he saw Little D's arm come out of the house with the pistol. He said that was how Little D shot Joe one time. Back to the murder of Mary, detectives just learned that her estranged husband, Eli Roach, has allegedly threatened to kill her in the past. Detectives are at the home of Mary's friend whose report showed that she was the last person that hanged out with Mary. Detective, so, in the past when you heard him say "I'm gonna kill you," did you hear him say that more than once or you heard him say that one time? A detective asked. "Probably more than once," she replied. Detective, I appreciate you. Take care of yourself. Okay, she replied. As the first 48 winds down, the developing story showed that documents revealed that Mary was shot inside her home and investigators believed her husband dragged her outside and dropped her body off. An arrest warrant has now been issued out for Eli Roach. In the first 48, Tulsa homicide responded to the murder of Mary, who was found shot and dumped in a parking lot. Homicide learned that the victim has been allegedly assaulted in the past by her estranged husband, Eli Roach. Homicide detectives headed to their homes to search the apartment. When detectives searched their home, they found bloodstains all over the house and a .380 casing. But they were unable to find Eli Roach. Overnight, patrol officers found the white Acura near the suspect's sister's home. A detective said he spoke with the suspect's sister yesterday. He said his sister told him that he showed up yesterday and he claimed that he was sleeping outside. She said he was hungry and he needed water. She said she asked him what happened and he kept saying it was an accident. She said she told him that he needed to turn himself in for questioning so that detectives can do their job. She said he told her that he was never going to turn himself in. She said after some minutes, he took off walking through the Northwest. After searching for Roach for 6 weeks without any luck, the team gets a lead that Roach is hiding in an abandoned trailer in North Tulsa. Detectives immediately made their way to the facility to see if they would find Roach. On getting there, the team detected that there is someone inside the trailer. It is left to see if the person in the trailer is Eli Roach. "Come outside of the door with your hands in the air," a detective said on loudspeaker. After some few minutes, "Time is up. You have to come out now or we are going to deploy paper balls into the trailer," the detective said through the loudspeaker again after they waited and no one came out. After some few seconds, Roach came out and handed himself over to the detectives. The detectives searched the trailer for the .380 but it was nowhere to be found. Detectives made their way back to homicide. Immediately they got to homicide, Roach was taken into the interrogation room for questioning. Detective Reggie and another detective went into the investigation room where Roach was been held. "Detective, honestly we are here because Mary has died. So, tell us what you know about that." "I know that she died," Roach replied. The detective asked him how it happened. He kept quiet for some seconds. After that, he said his gun just went off. Back to the murder of Joe Dickerson, Detective Jermaine Rogers has finally found an eyewitness that said Little D pulled the trigger. The witness, while narrating his side of the story, said after the first shot, they heard a couple of more shots. He said Joe was looking towards the street, therefore he didn't see it coming. He said little D shot Joe for nothing either than for pure jealousy. As the last 5 hours of the first 48 hours slip away, the search for little D kicks off. In the first 48, mobile homicide was responded to the murder of Joe Dickerson, who was shot in a family member's yard. Joe's little cousin Ernesto Fox, who is also known as Little D, had threatened to shoot him after an argument in the past. Detectives have interviewed 2 family members. One of the family members interviewed was present at the scene of the incident. Detectives have gotten a warrant for Joe's arrest. After 3 months, with no sign of Little D, he turns himself in. "Man, do you know what we are here to talk about?" a detective asked. "Yes, sir," Ernesto Fox replied. "Do you wish to talk to me right now?" the detective asked him again. "I don't wish to another any questions now," he replied. "I got this lawyer that you can call," the detective told Little D. "All right," Little D replied. Outro. Ernesto Fox was charged with murder, and he is awaiting trial. Criminal charges are often dropped or reduced, and the suspect is presumed innocent until proven guilty by a court of competent jurisdiction. 2 years after Joe's death, family and friends gathered at his graveyard to celebrate his 48 years birthday. They dropped flowers at his gravesite in remembrance of him. Back to Tulsa murder of Mary, Detective Ronnie meets her estranged husband, Eli Roach, to tell him how Mary ended up dead. Detective Ronnie: "How did it happen?" "It just went off," Roach replied. Detective Ronnie: "What type of gun was it?" Roach: "3ED." Detective Ronnie: "How did the gun just go off?" Roach said he kicked the table while he was arguing with the deceased, which made his gun go off. He said he was just a mad dog. He said everybody knows he and Mary argue all the time. Detective Ronnie: "So what happened after the gun went off?" He said firstly he knew she was shot. Then he realized she was not breathing. He said blood started coming out and she was kept on saying something that he couldn't put together. He said when she started losing a lot of blood, he quickly drove her to the hospital. Detective Ronnie: "What happened when you got to the hospital?" He said she was still feeling hurt. He said he went around the other side of the car and he took her out of the car. Detective Ronnie: "Where did you later drop her?" "Parking lot," Roach replied. Detective Ronnie appreciated Ronnie for turning himself in and talking to him, but he finds it difficult to believe that his gun went off because he kicked a table. Outro. Eli Roach was charged with murder, and he is awaiting trial. Criminal charges are often dropped or reduced, and the suspect is presumed innocent until proven guilty. This story takes place in Atlanta, Ga. Crime in Atlanta, Georgia, has been a significant problem since the mid-20th century. Is it a safe place to visit or even live? How can you protect yourself and your loved ones? A 911 call is always a good idea, even though no one made a call this time. At 2 a.m., above the hill, a neighbor has heard noises of gunshots, and the police arrive and see a car in a very suspected place. The police immediately take a look at the vehicle. "Male, bald head, asleep at the wheel," explains the officer. Unfortunately, the male wasn't asleep. He had a gunshot wound to the right side of his stomach, to the back of his head as well. "Go ahead and start fire and Grady out here," said the officer. The other officer said that the units were coming out. Without wasting time, Sergeant Jackson reports the death. Detective Andre Lowe was raised in this era. "I've been to the church of this area," he says. So Detective Andre Lowe knows the people that live here and is familiar with this place. When he took the first close look at the victim, he immediately knew who that male was. Detective Andre Lowe worked with the victim before, when the victim worked as security. The victim was a 48-year-old white man called Mike. The victim was born and raised in Atlanta, and he was a well-known promoter in Atlanta's clubs. He leaves behind a wife and 5 children. As the police officers take a good look inside and outside the car, they notice 2 castings in the vehicle's backseat. Not only do they find castings, but there is also a lot of money there. The police officers take a lot of pictures to use for evidence. There were thousands of dollars. It kind of makes you wonder if this was a robbery or what because that money was still in the vehicle, says Detective Andre Lowe. As mentioned before, a neighbor has heard the noises of the gunshots. Let's go and ask around the neighborhood, says the detective. Someone must know what happened. As they walked a block away, the detective and the police officers found 6 other castings. The police officers knocked on the neighbor's door and asked if they had heard anything. Then, the team found a witness around the shooting time but didn't call the police. The police officers decide to go and ask her some questions. This is Detective Andre Lowe. Can you tell me what happened tonight? He says. She says, I was talking to Mike, right there, in the corner of the street. I was trying to be one of the bottle service girls. Then, I saw these 2 guys. One went to the passenger side and put a gun to my side. The girl said they would kill her if she didn't leave. She says that Mike, the victim, said that he has no money. Then they started shooting. She said that she immediately ran. She was scared. Did you see how the other 2 guys looked? Says the detective. No. All I saw was that they were all in black. They had on hoodies, says the girl. Okay, says the detective. The police officers and the detective are happy that they found her. However, they got doubts too. Why didn't she call the police? Now or later, they still have some other good questions that she has to answer. 6 hours in, Detective Lowe meets with Mike's family, the victim's family. The medical examiner notified the family about the murder. Detective Lowe says that he is sorry for the loss, and he explained how the murder went and told them that he knew Mike. We're just trying to figure the motive, as he says. Did you all know if he had trouble with anyone? Asks the detective. No, nothing of that nature, the family's victims replied. They say that Mike was a good man, a father of 5 kids. The family of the victim was heartbroken and in need of an answer. What happened that night? Who was responsible? Detective Lowe says that he will do his best to find out the truth. Some hours went by, and Detective Lowe got a text. The girl, the witness, texted him, saying that she had told him everything that night. There is one thing she didn't point to the detective, and it was that Mike had texted her that night of his death. The girl needed some money, and Mike wanted to help her. She told him she wanted to work as the bottle girls at a club. Mike said they needed to meet face to face to talk about it. She said yes. After seeing those texts, the detective discussed them with the police officers. So, it was Mike's money. Why didn't she call 911? They think that this girl might have trapped Mike. She might be at fault in this murder case. While the police were doing their job, the victim's family held a goodbye ceremony where the murder took place. They lit up candles and asked for justice, as they should. As time slips away, Detective Lowe still needed answers. A week later, the witness, the girl, decides to show up and answer some questions finally. Let's start from the beginning, said Detective Lowe. She says, I texted him, and I asked if he could help me make some money. I wanted to be a bottle girl, and he was like, yeah, sure. He asked me how much I needed, and I said $1,000, and he said okay. Mike wanted to meet up the very next day. Is there anyone else that knew about you meeting up with Mike? Asks the detective. Yes, the only person who knew was Damo because I told him, she says. She says that she told Damo when Mike was on his way to meet her. When was the last time you talked to Damo? The detective asked. She says that the last time she talked to Damo was right after the shooting. I called Damo and told him that my friend just got shot, she says. Detective Lowe asked why she didn't call the police. The girl said that she was scared. I didn't know what to do, she said. Has Damo something to do with this? Asked Detective Lowe. No, I don't think he does, she says. Is there anything that you're leaving out, forgetting? Asks the detective. Earlier that day, we went looking for guns, she said. The detective was confused and asked who she was with. She continues, it was me, Daniel, and 2 other guys. His friends. She doesn't know their names, but they bought 2 guns. I took my ID because Damo said so. They bought the guns under my name, she says. They knew Mike was coming to get the girl. They knew that he had $1,000. The moment the police officers think that the girl had something to do with the murder, she says something. I don't want anything to happen to my family, she says. She said that he said he would kill her and her mother. The detective said that it's our job to get somebody out of the streets that don't belong on the streets. Who killed this boy? They asked her directly. The girl asked them if she could start over, and they said yes. The girl said, I looked at their faces. The 2 other guys, I don't know their names. But I know that they were with Damo. The victim says that the shooters were Damo's two friends who bought the guns under her name. They asked her how the person looked, which put the gun to her side. If she doesn't know their names and who they are, she can tell us how they looked. It's the least she can do. She continues to describe the guy. He had dreads, medium height. The detective asks her if Damo and his friends knew if Mike had any money. She said yes. Where do Damo work? Asks the detective. She said that Damo works somewhere in Pennsylvania. So, Damo doesn't live here. He is in and out of here. Detective Lowe says, hold on, and goes to search to find pieces of information about Damo. He goes on the computer and writes his name and where he lives. Detective Lowe finds a photo that matches the data. Damo Roberts is only 21-year-old. He has a prior conviction for auto theft. He's got a P.O. box. Detective Lowe says they should take the photo and show it to the girl if he is the one we're looking for. That's what they did. Do you know who this is? Asks Detective Lowe while showing the photo to her. She says, that's Damo. The detective asks if Damo went back to Pennsylvania. The girl says that she doesn't know where he is now and hasn't heard from him. Detective Lowe asks her for a phone number or any social media of Damo. The girl says that she can access Damo's recent calls because they share a phone plan. The detectives ask for more. They want to know who the other two guys are so that they can take them off the streets. But she keeps saying that the first time she has ever seen those two guys was that day. She says that she thinks they live in Pennsylvania. The police officers want to get these guys off the streets before they go and hurt somebody else. Detective Lowe thinks that Damo was the driver, and the other two boys were the shooters. He sends Damo's photo to the beat officer, hoping to run into that man. The next day, with no leads on where Damo was, the detective starts to see through his phone. It looks like he is making many calls on a Philadelphia number. They say, so I'm gonna plug it into social media platforms and see who stands behind this number, says Detective Lowe. The phone number belongs to a woman in Pennsylvania. Detective Howard Griffin decides to send this over to the intelligence analyst and see if they can find more information. After some hours, they got news from the intelligence analyst saying that the young lady had a restraining order against a young man called Corroborating. He is from the Pennsylvania era as well. This guy, Corroborating, had dreads, and the detectives think he might be one of the two shooters with Damo that night. Corroborating is a 19-year-old who has prior convictions for harassment and unlawful handgun possession. Without wasting time, the detectives decided to show the photo of Corroborating to the witness and see if he was the guy that pointed a gun at her to see if she noticed him. Lowe and Detective Jerry and Shepherd Head decide to meet with the witness. She was confident. She identified Corroborating. He is the one that put a gun on her side. The detectives decide to reach out to Philadelphia PD to get information on Arindel and his known associates. Philadelphia Police Homicide directed them into a detective from the Pocono Police Department. They say that these guys are a part of a blood gang. Arindel is a suspected gang member in the Pocono Mountains region of Pennsylvania. Apparently, there are kingpins up there. Detective Lowe gets informed that they deal with drugs, with dope. They are some hazardous guys. Looking at his photos and personal information, they noticed that Arindel had several pictures with a specific guy. The Pocono Police Department was able to link this guy. He was Javon Nunes. Detective Lowe says that it looks like it has a warrant now. 21-year-old Javon Nunes is wanted in New York for robbery. Detective Lowe hopes that the victim identifies this guy too. A few hours later, the detectives meet with the witness again and ask her to view the photographs of Javon Nunes. Luckily, the witness identifies. The detectives high-fived each other. Detective Lowe is sure that Nunes and Arindel are the shooters. He says that he needs to track Damo first. A few days later, the case takes an unexpected turn. Damo is locked in jail for a stolen car out of Henry County. A friend of Damo passed a message that said that Damo wanted to talk to the police. The detectives decide to go fast before he changes his mind. They meet up at the Henry County Jail and decide to speak. Tell me why you wanted me down here, asks the detective. The incident that you are investigating, the murder case, said Damo. He said that there was an armed robbery and Mike got shot. Damo says that he knows who shot him. They are real gang brothers. Karim Arindel. The other guy's name is Javon Nunes, said Damo. Damo explains how the three of them were together that day. We got here morning time and bought guns, he says. He says that the next day, the witness called Damo and told him that Mike was shot. Were you with him when Mike got shot? Asks the detective. No, he said Damo. He says that they had nothing to do with him. Damo says that he didn't give any false information. After they are done asking him questions, detectives talk with each other. Detective Lowe says she was texting with Damo. Damo for sure told the other two guys when Mike arrived. But Damo didn't tell us that. The team decides to wait on getting murder warrants until they can interview Nunes and Arindel. Then Lowe gets a break and Nunes is in jail. He was taken into custody in New York for his outstanding warrant for robbery. Detective Lowe and Griffin will fly up to Newark, New Jersey to interview Nunes in jail. Detectives must work with Pocono PD and try to locate Arindel. Before detectives can interview Nunes, the case takes a different turn. Arindel has an active warrant now for charges up there. The Pocono police will take Arindel into custody on an unrelated domestic violence warrant. While heading into Pocono Regional Mountains, the detectives decide to interview Arindel first. They finally meet with Arindel. The detectives introduce themselves. They say, "We came from Atlanta. There was a shooting and a victim. Do you know who Damo Roberts is?" "I kind of know him," says Arindel. The detectives tell him that they know that Damo came down to Atlanta from the Poconos, with a group of people too. "One of them was actually you, Arindel," the detective said. Arindel looked surprised. Arindel admits that he drove to Atlanta with Damo and Nunes. However, he kept saying that he had nothing to do with it, that he wasn't there. Detective Lowe decides to charge Arindel with murder. After that, he headed to New York to interview Nunes in jail. Detective Lowe got a call from the Suffolk County Jail. They say that Nunes didn't want to talk at all. This way Nunes gets charged for murder, and Detective Lowe will present evidence of Damo to the district attorney. In the end, Karim Arindel pleaded guilty to felony murder and was sentenced to 35 years. Javon Nunes was convicted for murder and armed robbery. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences. What about Damo Roberts? Subsequent evidence placed Damo near the crime scene at the time of the murder. Damo Roberts was convicted of felony murder and armed robbery. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences. The victim, Mike, will be missed. Justice will always be served. The breakup. On an evening at 6:45 p.m. near a quiet block in Mobile, Alabama, another crime happened. Every crime scene has its own story, and every time is heartbreaking. It all begins with a 911 call. What was the emergency? Someone had called 911 and told the address. It's a white house, and it's abandoned. There's a car parked behind the house, and there's a girl in there. The operator asked if the girl was inside of the vehicle. The caller said yes. The caller continues to describe the situation, saying that the girl got a pink towel covering her whole face and everything, and her windows are up. The caller said that he didn't know if the girl was breathing or not. The 911 operator says that they are going to alert the police. The patrol and the DMS responded and decided to go to the said location. They arrive at the area and find a woman in the passenger seat. She was dead. CPL Kenneth Gillespie finds the place suspicious. It's a big abandoned house. The police officers ask about the victim's name. Who is she? The victim's name was Shanna Sumter, a black woman, only 27-year-old. She went to Murphy High School and earned her JED certificate. She worked as an insurance adjuster. Shanna leaves behind a large family. She was a mother and she had a 9-year-old son. Police officers and the detectives find out that she was shot in the left side of her head. Her cell phone was right down there to her legs. There was a gun right there, a .38 caliber revolver at her feet. The police officers were surprised and said that typically, they don't leave the weapon there when someone kills someone. One of the police officers says that it is a possibility that she had shot herself. Maybe it was a suicide. The police officer said the gunshot wound would be consistent if she was left-handed, but it's also possible that somebody in the driver's seat could have popped here as well. It was in the back of an abandoned house, and the police officers thought that it was a pretty big chance of being a suicide. It's a place where nobody would have seen anything. On the other hand, it's a good place for somebody to kill you, says CPL Kenneth Gillespie. Someone had called the reporter missing, and it was the victim's sister. Her sister called saying that she hadn't seen Shanna since Saturday. The police officer said that it would be a good idea to hear from her family. The police officer and the detectives meet up with the sister's victim. She seemed nervous, so they gave her some water. The officers say to her, "We don't know a lot yet, but we know that Shanice has been shot." Her sister didn't know and started crying. The officer says, "I am sorry for your loss. We don't know much. We don't know if it was self-inflicted or another person shot her." They asked the sister's victim if she had ever said anything about harming herself before. Was she the type to get depressed easily? Asked the officer. Her sister said that she had thoughts of harming herself before, but she always hid them. Was she left-handed or right-handed? Asks the officer. She said she was left-handed. The officers ask who is she involved in a relationship, and her sister tells her a name. The victim was in a relationship with someone called Peter Gales. He stayed with the victim. They lived together. When was the last time you talked to her? Asks the officer. She said yesterday. The detectives ask for the number of Peter Gales, and she gives it to them. Peter wasn't answering his phone. The detectives decide to look through the victim's phone. The text with Peter. They had texted yesterday at 11 a.m. The victim had texted him, "Peter, you rather be on the phone with a hoe. That is crazy. I am not happy about this, honestly. I want this to end. I am tired of you putting your hands on me. I want no boyfriend. I must do what's good for me." The team discovered she was fighting with her boyfriend Peter Gales the day before she was found dead. She was trying to get away from him. Peter has obtained a warrant for possession of cocaine. Let's bring him in. The next morning, detectives find Peter at his mother's apartment. They bring him in so they can start asking questions. "I am Detective Glue, and this is my partner Detective Rogers. You know what, we want to talk to you," they say. Peter says that the baby daddy of Shanice told him that she was shot. "How long have you been together?" the detectives ask. "It would have been a year in August," he said. He said that the last time they talked was the day before yesterday and that he and the victim got in an argument. He said he was riding in a black rental car. Peter explains, "We were in the car and then my side chick called me. My other girlfriend. Shanice got so jealous. She just got crazy. She kind of hit the cop and my gun just fell on the passenger side somewhere on the floor. I get her to drop me off. She left with everything in the car. My money and my gun were in the car. I had been texting to see where she was. I didn't get a reply." He says that the victim told him about suicidal thoughts before. "What other stuff has she told you?" asks the detective. He said that she always used to say how he didn't love her and made her look stupid. "I thought she was gonna come back. My girl is gone," says Peter as he cries loudly. The detectives tell him that Shanice was found in Dauphin Island Parkway. He didn't know that. The detectives don't believe him. The texts were showing something else. She wasn't happy with him. The detective tried to scare him a little bit and said, "There are 6 detectives that are listening to everything you're saying now. We want you to tell us what happened." This seemed to affect him. Peter goes, "It's just, she grabbed the gun so quickly, and we're arguing, going crazy. Next thing I know, a shotgun noise. I didn't know what to do. I drove around for some time." The detective said that, "I don't believe that she killed herself and that they completed the autopsy this morning. Based on that direction that bullet traveled, it wouldn't be possible for her to shoot herself." What happened in the car? Peter gives up and decides to tell the truth. "She had grabbed the gun. I grabbed the gun from her. She tries to hop up. When she jumped up, the gun went off." He says, "You had the gun on your hand, right?" He replied, "Yes." "She was not moving. I put on the cover up. It was a towel. And then I left." 20 hours in the first 48 hours. Detective Gillespie closed his case. Peter did pull the trigger, even if he regrets it. Peter Gales was charged with murder and is awaiting trial. The victim was a mother that didn't deserve such tragedy to happen to her.